the London Underground closed for business. Where we are here is Westminster Station, one of the most popular tube stations in London for both commuters but also tourists, because we've got, as you can see here, Big Ben and also the Houses of Parliament. And normally that is a hive of activity, that tube station. But it's closed today for a couple of reasons. Well, there's a rail strike and a tube strike, the largest rail strike in 3 decades here in the UK. And the union says there's a couple of issues here at the heart of this dispute. Firstly, the railways want to modernise, and that means job losses. Secondly, they say that their workers have had their wages suppressed, sometimes frozen, for years. And we're talking about some of the lowest paid workers in the transport industry in the UK, the cleaners, the guards and the maintenance workers.
Some of our members have not had a pay rise for the 3rd anniversary now. We can resolve that if we've got a proper negotiating framework. But the fact is that Grant Shapps, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson are dictating the terms of this dispute. Now, they can either facilitate a settlement or they can block one. At the moment, they're blocking one.
This strike has caused chaos for millions of commuters across the country. Some have just stayed at home, others have been riding bikes to work, others are walking, others are driving their cars, and that is leading to traffic jams in London. And this sense of disruption is being used by Boris Johnson to portray the unions in a negative light.
We need to get ready to stay the course, because these reforms, these improvements in the way we run our railways are in the interest of the travelling public. They will help to cut costs for fare payers up and down the country. But they're also in the interest of the railways, of railway workers and their families.
The big question now is not only when will this dispute be resolved, but could other industries and other unions get involved in industrial disputes? Wages in this country have been suppressed for the best part of a decade, and even Boris Johnson last year admitted he'd like to see higher wages in the UK. And with inflation now hovering around 9%, people's wages are simply not keeping up with the cost of living. And that leads many to wonder whether we're seeing a new era of industrial disputes.
To your finance news now with Sue Lannon. And Sue, there's some good news for casino operator Crown Resorts.
Yes, it's been given conditional approval by the New South Wales gaming regulator to actually open its flagship Barangaroo Casino in Sydney. It has not been allowed to open the casino because of it admitted facilitating money laundering and criminal activities by Asian crime gangs at its casinos in Melbourne and Sydney. Now, this approval comes after the billionaire owner James Packer was bought out by US private equity firm Blackstone, and all the people associated with James Packer left the Crown Resort board. This follows 3 independent inquiries. There was 2 royal commissions, one in Melbourne and one in Perth, and a major inquiry in New South Wales. So the New South Wales Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority last year deemed the company unsuitable to hold a gambling licence following these major public inquiries that exposed money laundering and criminal activity linked to Asian crime gangs. So the decision meant the gaming floors of Crown's Barangaroo skyscraper have never been used. But now the New South Wales gaming regulator, the chairman, Philip Crawford, said in a statement that under the authority's supervision, Crown has rebuilt its gaming model from the ground up, quote, which has meant deep structural change around governance, anti-money laundering measures and the corporate culture. Earlier this month, the federal court approved US private equity giant Blackstone's $8.9 billion takeover of Crown. This takes it off the stock exchange and turns it into a private company. Crown Resorts said today it's in an important day. It says it's worked closely with the regulator over 15 months to put the right measures in place. It says it wants to become one of the most respected operators of resorts in the world. Now, for more, let's talk to lawyer and founder of legal consultancy firm GovLaw. Andrew Fernbach is an expert in anti-money laundering. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. What is your response to this decision by the New South Wales gaming regulator?
Thank you for that. Look, I think this was to be expected because we did see Crown given the green light in Victoria and able to proceed, albeit under the special monitor, for a number of years. And obviously they've put in a lot of work there behind the scenes working with the regulator.
Do you think, yes, well, do you think, though, that Crown Resorts has really cleaned up its act. Is it a new company now that Blackstone, a private equity firm, will take it over?
Look, I think a lot of that will remains to be seen with the new management team that will be put in place by the new owner, and they'll have to satisfy not only the state-based gambling regulators, but also the federal regulator, AUSTRAC, in regard to anti-money laundering, risk management and compliance.
Well, Crown says it spent 15 months working with the regulator. It's pledged to become, quote, one of the most respected operators in the world. I mean, do you think that Crown Resorts can clean up its act?
Well, I think you're going to see that obviously there's a federal court action that is still taking place at the federal level by AUSTRAC against Crown Resorts. So this, as it were, green light at the state level is not the end of the story.
Andrew Fernback, are gambling laws in Australia and the anti-money laundering laws too weak to control the activities of casinos? Because there's also problems with pokie machines at RSL clubs, and the other big operator, Star Casino, also admitted for still allowing money laundering at its casinos.
I think we need to see two things. We need to see better integration, and we're starting to see that between federal and state levels. So AUSTRAC and the Victorian Gaming Casino Control Commission signed an MOU back at the end of April to work together on an enhanced basis. So we need to see better integration between federal and state agencies on this. But secondly, we need to see more balanced enforcement from AUSTRAC. So we've seen the big enforcement cases are 1.3 billion against Westpac. Before that, 700 million against Commonwealth Bank, 43 million against Tabcorp. But what we really need to see is AUSTRAC balancing out in the application of its regulatory toolkit. We need to see more of the infringement notice, which would be like a parking ticket, the sort of smaller end of town, requiring enforceable undertakings, and also requiring independent experts to go in and do risk assessments, check out the program. So there are a whole lot of other aspects that we need to see from AUSTRAC in a more regular enforcement approach, including the lesser options, because waiting several years for federal court action is not enough, obviously, to be managing the risks in this space.
Okay, anti-money laundering expert Andrew Fernback from GovLaw, thank you so much for joining us.
Most welcome. Thank you.
Now, the Australian share market is weaker now. It opened higher after a big relief rally on Wall Street, but it's now run out of steam. Let's have a quick look at the markets. The All Ordinaries Index and the ASX 200 are both slightly weaker. Oil stocks are still going up and utilities have also risen today. Let's have a quick look at the movers today on the market. Woodside Petroleum is up after a rise in oil prices overnight, although oil prices have now turned negative. Miner Stanmore Resources says it's very disappointed with the Queensland government's increases to coal royalties. Medibank Private, the health insurer, says it will return money to customers as part of its COVID-19 financial support package. Hum is taking a hit. The fintech has seen most of its directors resign. That's after a plan by Latitude Financial Group to take it over fell through. Looking at Asian markets now, the Nikkei opened higher in Japan, went lower, and now it's higher again. Asian markets are weaker, big fall in Hong Kong, and the New Zealand market is down. Now, we saw a big relief rally in the US after investors returned from the Juneteenth public holiday. Big growth stocks and oil companies drove the gains. So we saw big jumps from Tesla, Microsoft and Apple. All of the major indexes gained more than 2%. Turning now to commodities, spot gold's lower. Now, oil prices rose overnight, but they've tumbled today. That is because the US President Joe Biden is pushing to bring down soaring fuel costs in the US. Mr. Biden expected overnight to temporarily suspend a tax on fuel. And let's have a look at currencies. The Australian dollar is also taking a hit, buying around 69.2 US cents, and that's finance.
Thanks, Sue. Pioneering women in Australian politics and society are being honoured in a new exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra. And though the women featured come from many different backgrounds, they all share a common cause.
Rosie Batty never set out to be a change maker, but that's what she became in the wake of her son Luke's murder in 2014.
I didn't expect to be listened to. I just spoke my truth.
The grieving mother helped start a crucial conversation about family violence And after 8 years of advocacy, she no longer feels the need to be grateful for a seat at the table and the chance to make her case.
This is what we deserve, and it's the least of what we should expect.
She's just one of several trailblazing women featured in the Changemakers exhibition, which is opened at the Museum of Australian Democracy. They include feminist author Anne Summers, 2021 Australian of the Year Grace Tame, and the first female Governor-General, Dame Quentin Bryce.
There is a source of inspiration and support to be found in the courage of these young changemakers.
It's a fitting tribute inside Old Parliament House, a building which for decades was the domain of powerful men.
It's incredibly important and very, very timely at this point in Australia's democratic progress.
Several artists have also worked together to recreate iconic banners of the feminist movement. They chart the battles women have fought, from equal pay to reproductive autonomy, struggles which are still ongoing.
These rights were hard won, and that we can very easily go back and have those be taken away.
A reminder that while much has changed, there's more to come. Patrick Bell, ABC News, Canberra.
You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. The energy market operator will gradually remove its intervention in Australia's East Coast energy market over the coming days. AEMO suspended the market a week ago amid fears supply shortages would lead to blackouts. The government says the power grid needs to continue a transition to renewable energy to stave off the potential of further disruptions. Former swimming coach Dick Kane has been charged over the alleged sexual abuse of 2 teenage girls in the 1970s. Police arrested the 76-year-old at a home in Condell Park this morning following an investigation into the historical sexual abuse of 2 teenage girls at a swim school in Carrs Park. He's been charged with 9 offences, including indecent assault. Crown Resorts has been given conditional permission to open its casino at Barangaroo in Sydney. The Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority previously refused to grant the gaming giant a licence after a year-long investigation uncovered links to money laundering. The authority now says Crown has overhauled its gaming model and is suitable to operate a casino under initial supervision. And monsoon floods are continuing to wreak havoc in Bangladesh and in parts of India and China. Hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes, with the death toll over 50. Officials say it's the worst they've seen in more than a century. To some breaking news, and authorities in Afghanistan say at least 155 people have been killed in an earthquake in the country's east. The magnitude 6 quake struck overnight in the province of Paktika. Details about the disaster remain scarce. It is believed rescue teams are currently being airlifted in via helicopter. We will bring you more as we get it. Now to our top story today, the East Coast energy market. It'll resume normal operations from 4 a.m. tomorrow. The operator's CEO, Daniel Westerman, and Energy Minister Chris Bowen say the grid must be protected from future shocks.
This situation is caused by a multitude of factors, and yes, ageing plant, which does break down and has more maintenance issues, is an issue. Of course, the war in Ukraine and the impact of global commodity prices is an issue. I think it points you to the long-term answer to this, which is a transition to firmed renewables and transmission. That is the long-term answer to de-link us from international price shocks, as well as ageing infrastructure. We'll absolutely be working very closely with the regulator and the Energy Markets Commission on a series of actions that do take steps to prevent this from happening again. It's not a place where the market operator wants to be in suspending the market, and so we're looking at we will obviously undertake a detailed investigation together with the regulator and others, understand comprehensively the lessons learned and put in place actions so that it doesn't happen again.
I want to see this done. I want to see it done right. Now, as I've also made clear, there will be a degree of flexibility, of course, as to how states implement the capacity mechanism with particular regard to their own state circumstance. But this is a massive transformation which we need to get cracking on. We need to make faster progress on this transformation of the energy grid, and we need the capacity mechanism to help us do that, to provide that safety net underneath as we engage in this very significant transformation to a much more renewable economy, a much more renewable energy system with much more storage. Now, I've made clear, and ministers have made clear, we want the capacity mechanism to primarily focus on new technology, storage being prime amongst it. That is what we will deliver. There'll be further discussions between me and state ministers, but I'm very confident we will deliver a good national framework, because we have to be getting on with the job, because this transformation, which is so important to the new government's agenda, is actually also so important for the country.
Meanwhile, Australia's first community-owned energy retailer, Enova, has been placed into voluntary administration. Around 13,000 customers, mostly in the New South Wales Northern Rivers region, have been advised that their electricity will not be disconnected. They'll be transferred to a new retailer by the energy regulator. Enova opened its doors in 2016 as a social enterprise, becoming the country's first community-owned energy provider. The former chair, Alison Crook, joins us now. Welcome to you. I am going to emphasise that point once again to our audience. You're not the current chair, but we are hoping that you can explain to us why Enova may have found the current climate difficult to operate in.
Thank you, Kirsten. Yes, I cannot speak on behalf of the board, obviously, but I think the point that audiences need to understand is that this is a long-term brewing crisis. Yes, there have been wars. Yes, there's a cold snap. And yes, the previous governments have just taken far too long to move to get more renewables readily available. However, the fundamental problem is one of the market structure. As was said to me on a previous occasion by the former head of the AEMO, of the market operator, the structure should never have been such that generators were allowed to own retailers. So what we have got is some very big oligopoly. It's a very big company, some very big companies, basically an oligopoly, which own both ends of the market supply chain. So that when there is volatility in the market, it benefits the generators. And the generators can then, the large-scale retailers who are owned by the large-scale generators can afford to ride out the volatility because their generators are making super profits. The small-scale retailers, and retailers are basically there to protect consumers from these spikes and large hikes in market price, are not able, unless they can get hedges, to ride out that market volatility. When the prices continue at the price that they have been, and let's face it, these are prices that are being determined because we allowed in the first place 2 more market floors, that our gas people to export their gas rather than meeting in-country needs first, and many countries do that. And Western Australia does obviously too. And because we've also allowed our in-country prices to be set in relation to those export prices. So there are 2 more market floors.
Can I interrupt there ever so briefly, just to ask you to give us a bit of background as to the social enterprise model that Enova sought to adopt, and what had been the big hope, what it would be able to achieve as the market moved towards this transition to renewables?
Right. So the vision for Enova has always been that we'd support the development of community-owned energy. And the aim is to make for resilient communities. We don't think that everybody needs to be reliant on a large centralised system with very large-scale transmission. It is possible to have community-owned solar near regional ports and regional hospitals and regional airports, to have people sharing their energy, to have batteries at the ends of streets, and to, in general, be much more self-sufficient than people currently are, and to own and keep the money circulating in regions.
And so do you think now that the current situation means that model clearly isn't viable right now?
That model isn't viable right now because it's not possible. The government has also allowed the regulator to set a market price which is laughably lower than the wholesale price at which small retailers need to buy that energy. So if the market price is set, if the market price is capped at for the what's called the default market offer is capped at 19% above where it was last year in Queensland and say 8% in New South Wales, and it's costing the small retailers 200% more to buy, you can see that they have to subsidise that difference. That's something a large-scale retailer who's owned by a generator making super profits can afford to do. It's a way of wiping out small retailers. Unless government was prepared to step in and either alter the default market price or back the small retailers, then what they're looking to in the future is a market in which there is no competition for the large-scale gentailers, as they're known, and the end result of that will be much higher prices for everyone. It's what's happened in the UK just recently.
If the Australian market is able to transition from here, how long do you think it might take until a model such as the one you were looking over at Enova might actually begin to work again?
Look, I think that it's really very important for everybody to move as rapidly as possible towards renewables. But I think what you'll find is that as we do that, you'll have I'm sorry, my phone's going off. You'll have my apologies.
Oh, no, that's okay. You were just explaining about moving towards renewables and how long it might take before another model such as the Enova one might become possible.
It's very hard to tell, but what I'm suggesting is that even though governments are now moving rapidly, and that's wonderful to see, and I applaud the movement that's being made in that direction, and it would take at least 2-3 years to get a lot of those things happening, what will happen is that if there are no small players left, then it's going to be very hard to get them off the ground again, and in the meantime, all of the pricing changes will be people will be held hostage by the big players because they will own everything.
Good to speak to you, former Enova Chair Alison Crook. Thank you very much for giving us that background.
Thank you, Kirsten.
The West Australian Government has apologised to former elite athletes who suffered mistreatment and abuse while training at the WA Institute of Sport's Women's Artistics Gymnastics program. The apology follows a review from Sport Integrity Australia, which found gymnasts, some of them as young as 5 years old, were abused in the program, which spanned 3 decades. Reporter Samia O'Keefe joins us now from the WA Parliament. Samia, what did the government say today?
Kirsten, this apology comes following a review by Sport Integrity Australia, which examined dozens of allegations from former gymnasts that they were abused physically and emotionally while training at WACE between 1988 and 2016 when the program was closed. Now, that review spoke to more than 90 former athletes, coaches and support staff, and when it was handed down in April, it found that the abuse did likely occur. Now, at that time in April, WACE publicly came out and apologised to the gymnasts for the behaviour that they suffered. And now today, the Sports Minister David Templeman has also delivered a public apology to 6 of the women who were here at Parliament today.
The review heard evidence of conduct and coaching practices that should never have occurred. While an apology cannot undo the actions of the past, it is an important starting point to make amends and rebuilding trust. The West Australian Government unreservedly apologises to all gymnasts who suffered as a result of participating in the WACE program, and to families and carers of those who suffered.
And how have the former athletes responded?
As I mentioned, there were 6 women who were in Parliament today, so while it was dozens that made that the allegations, there were 6 of them here today to receive that apology, and they have welcomed it, but they also want to make sure that there's action that's followed up from this apology.
We were very happy that the state government stepped in to oversee the recommendations and also step in to oversee the reconciliation process. We haven't had a great deal of luck so far getting that process off the ground. WACE has been Sam is always sort of a bit defensive, and these are sort of something that we really need the support because we don't have faith that it would happen without the oversight of the state government.
Now, in addition to delivering that apology, the government also announced today it would set up a child protection unit to ensure this sort of behaviour can't happen again, and the women have welcomed that announcement.
Samia O'Keefe in Perth, thank you. Hundreds have braved the chilly waters of Hobart's Derwent River in the Dark Mofo nude swim to celebrate the winter solstice. Alexandra Alvaro has more from Hobart.
Well, the beach might be empty now, but there was an absolute buzz in the air at 7:42 when the starter flares went off and 2,000 people ran into the water here at Long Beach in Sandy Bay. They were here to celebrate the end of the winter solstice, the end of the longest night of the year as part of Hobart's Dark Mofo Festival. It was pretty cold. The temperature outside the water was about 5 degrees, while the temperature inside the water was about 11. But the wind chill wasn't too much of a factor this year, lucky for the swimmers. We had a chat to some of them before they headed into the water. Let's take a listen.
Oh, it was absolutely amazing, very exhilarating, very fresh.
I don't think I could hear myself breathe over the screaming.
It was amazing, to be honest. I was all sorts of anxious. My crazy friends dragged me in this morning, and I was really more worried about the cold than the nakedness, but I did it.
It was everything we expected and more.
What did it feel like?
Like that horrible pins and needles feeling, like all over you.
The hardest bit was waiting to actually go in, and the easiest bit was staying a little bit longer this time to watch everything and then come out.
So not your first time?
It's my fifth. It was so good. It was, exhilarating. Really the smoke in the air was just so beautiful.
Yeah,
just being around all these like-minded people.
Like nothing I've done before. It was so cold out there, and it's like you're letting go of all your fears and uncomfortabilities and self-consciousness, and you just let it go. You just let it go and you get in to do it.
The event has been running since 2013. Then it was about 200 people, now about 2,000. And most people cite a sense of camaraderie and just wanting to be a part of something bigger when participating in this event. And there was certainly no shortage of people wanting to participate this year, and people also talking about participating even next year as they got out of the water.
Those braving the water in Tasmania are not the only ones to have taken an early morning dip, with a group of locals in Melbourne joining the solstice swimmers in the Yarra. Margaret Paul went along to have a look in inner Melbourne.
I'm here on Wurundjeri country on the banks of the mighty Yarra Birrarung River in inner Melbourne. And I mean inner Melbourne. The city's only about 4 kilometres that way. For people who know Melbourne, I'm about 200 metres upstream from Dyot's Falls. The Eastern Freeway is just there. I can hear the cars in the background. This is inner Melbourne, and it's not part of Melbourne where you'd normally see people swimming in the Yarra River. But that's just what's been happening. Early this morning, I was joined by about 20 swimmers who bravely got their clothes off and jumped in the water and went for a little bit of a swim here in inner Melbourne. They say the water temperature is about 10 degrees today, so it's quite cold. But let's hear from some of those swimmers as to why they do that.
Read an article that said that it was okay to swim in the Yarra, and I was walking with a girlfriend of mine and I said, I've got a crazy idea. I want to start swimming in the river. What do you think? And she's like, I'll do that with you. So we got a small group of people together and we started swimming.
Is it safe?
Yes, it is. So we've done water testing, and the water testing is really, really clean. It's amazing. And after swimming, after rain, we just keep our heads out.
What do you say to people who walk past this river all the time and say, that is crazy?
I say, you don't know what you're talking about. Wait until you get in. It's fantastic. I think the common questions are, it's cold, or is it dirty? And I'm really passionate about helping people understand that the Yarra is swimmable.
So this is an urban river, and there are issues with pollution, E. coli, stormwater runoff, all those kinds of things. So the swimmers who I spoke to do take precautions. They don't put their head under if there's been a heavy rain, and they don't swim if they've got an exposed cut and things like that. They do play it safe. But it's all part of a project, really, to get the entire Yarra Birrarung River swimmable by 2030, which is a really remarkable goal, I guess. Now, I don't think I could do across from the banks of the Yarra without jumping in. So I'll tell you what it feels like. It's 10 degrees. It's pretty cold. And by way of comparison, most outdoor swimming pools are heated to about 27, 28 degrees. So 10 degrees is pretty cold. But there's only one way to tell you what it really feels like, and that's jumping in. So here I go. It is cold.
Margaret Paul going the distance for us there. Now, for more sport news, Daniel Garb joins us. And Daniel, of course, the build-up to Game 2 of the State of Origin is continuing, and a Queensland star spoke today.
He has, and he's been compared to one of the greats, Cameron Munster we are speaking of. That's after he engineered a Game 1 win for Queensland, of course, in Sydney as part of this Origin series. Now they're looking ahead to Game 2 in Perth, and Cameron Munster was an absolute star. So a bit of a surprise in Game 1. Obviously, the ball very much in Queensland's court when it comes to winning this Origin series. But Game 2 on Sunday in Perth is going to be an absolute epic affair. Cameron Munster again holds the key to Queensland's fortunes. Many have been comparing him to Wally Lewis, can you believe it, based on his performance, but he's having none of that.
Oh, look, it's a nice accolade to have, but he's done a lot more stuff than what I've done in my career. And he's obviously the king of Queensland, and he's always going to be the king of Queensland. You have greats like Jonathan Thurston and Darren Lockyer in the 6 jersey as well. And there's only one Wally Lewis, and I can just go out there and do my job for Queensland.
So the Maroons get into Perth tomorrow. New South Wales have been based in WA all week. The pressure's on them. They've got to win in Perth on Sunday to keep the series alive. Here's their coach, Brad Fittler.
We just compete a bit harder. We lost a lot of the effort areas, and that's really disappointing. So we just compete harder, and I think we all feel confident that if we do that, then we can win.
One of our biggest names is planning a sporting comeback.
Lauren Jackson, 41 years of age, 9 years into retirement, is planning a comeback for the Opals for the World Cup later this year, which is an extraordinary Australian sporting story. She's one of the finest products we've ever had, both for our national teams and, of course, overseas. She is a 5-time WNBA champion, a 4-time Olympic medalist. She's been playing this year for Albury Wodonga. So now the other side of 40, she still feels she can add to the Opals, and she will join their training camp ahead of the World Cup. She does need permission, though, to use medicinal marijuana, which she has been since she has retired, so she needs that process to come through. But what a story this would be if Lauren Jackson suits up again for the Opals come the World Cup later this year at 41 years of age. Their greatest ever player, without doubt.
Absolutely. Now, there's been another medal for Australia at the World Championships.
Molly O'Callaghan, who is certainly developing into a name to watch out for in Australian swimming. The teen sensation, her first individual meet at the World Championships at Budapest, and she claims silver in the 200 metres freestyle behind Yang of China. So that keeps the run going for Australian women at these World Championships. Every single event they have medalled in, and Molly O'Callaghan keeps that run going, which is quite extraordinary. Australia sits 4th on the medal tally at the halfway point, and the females are most certainly leading the Australian charge. Molly O'Callaghan, the teen sensation, taking out another medal for Australia in Budapest.
OK, now Sri Lanka has taken out the one-day series over Australia.
Yeah, they won overnight, so that's 3-1. The series clinched for Sri Lanka. That is the first time they've taken out a one-day series against Australia since 1992, which is an amazing achievement for them. They've been in the doldrums a bit as a cricketing nation, so this will give them a massive lift. Sri Lanka made 110 to help Sri Lanka made 258. Australia fell 4 runs short. They just lost wickets at regular intervals, including this one. David Warner stumped for 99. That would be hard to take. And then Sri Lanka, of course, closed things out with 4 wickets to go. So well done to them. Now Australia looks ahead to the Test series.
OK, thanks, Daniel. Prince William is celebrating his 40th birthday, with the milestone coming at a time of increasing responsibility for the second in line to the throne. A public advocate for issues such as mental health and homelessness, the Prince has become a symbol for an evolving monarchy.
Where do you go for your 40th? It seems a supermarket in West London. There was a surprise shopper there this afternoon. The Duke of Cambridge popped in to give some birthday cake to big issue seller Dave Martin. The pair met a couple of weeks ago when Prince William went out with Dave to sell the magazine. As he enters a new decade, tackling homelessness is a priority for William.
He's invested in the problem, and he's invested in trying to find a solution for those who are affected by the problem. And long may it continue is what I say.
On a personal level, marriage to Kate and fatherhood have suited him. Their children were some of the stars of the show over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. And his focus on his family will see a big move this summer when the Cambridges leave London to set up home in Windsor.
The move here has been driven by personal reasons. Behind the castle walls, there is greater freedom for the family than they currently have in London. The children will go to school nearby. But it also puts William closer to his grandmother at a time when he is stepping up his official duties.
One unresolved issue is the fallout with his brother, Prince Harry.
I do know from sources very close to William that he is still very hurt about some of the things that his brother and his sister-in-law have said and done. There's not the closeness there once was, and I think there's probably quite a few bridges to be rebuilt before they get to that stage.
The years ahead will be filled with significant change. But for now, at 40, the once cautious, contained prince has become a more open, confident future king.
Time to take a look at the weather now. Here's Nate Byrne.
One frontal system has cleared the southeast, a bit of a cool air mass behind it, and a little bit of wet weather, but the next is approaching the southwest. For most of the country, though, you're sitting underneath a high-pressure system. That's keeping things clear, though onshore winds will bring a little bit of wet weather to parts of the southwest corner and to the northeast as well. But the southwest will cop the next front. That moves in tomorrow before shifting into the southeast on Friday. That's just a couple of days before the next front makes an approach to the southwest early next week. For the south, some wet weather and some snow along the ranges in the southeast too. But tomorrow, things looking mostly clear. 23 with a fine day in Brisbane, 19 for Sydney. It's aiming for 14 in Canberra and 17 for Melbourne. 16 in Hobart. You'll see some showers developing. Adelaide has a mostly sunny 18. Perth, another wet one for you. 19 the top. And up north, Darwin staying sunny. It's getting to 32.
Thanks, Nate. A reminder, you can keep up to date on all the latest news across all your devices at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Kirsten Aiken. Greg Jennett is up next with Afternoon Briefing. Among his guests, the NDIS Minister, Bill Shorten, Queensland Treasurer, Cameron Dick, and the Nationals' Michael McCormack. We'll also be bringing you more on the developing story this afternoon from Afghanistan. A magnitude 6 earthquake is believed to have killed more than 150 people. Details throughout the afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow.
It's the show that has advertisers shaking in their boots. Yuck! Where adverts can go from hero to zero.
That's not very sexy in terms of messaging.
And it's just not clever marketing.
This, to me, is genius, Will. And every campaign gets a roasting.
Coffee fit for an Aussie. In the words of my people, yeah, nah.
New Gruen, tonight at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, the one and only Kate Miller-Heidke is with us in studio as she sets off on tour.
And we're all shook up. Zach's here with his verdict on Baz Luhrmann's epic biopic, Elvis. Don't miss it.
Children aged 5 to 11 years can now receive their free COVID-19 vaccine. It's the best way to protect them, your family, and community. All vaccines are thoroughly tested before use and reduce a child's chances of getting sick. Talk to your GP, pharmacist, or healthcare professional if you have questions. Book now at australia.gov.au. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Some people search for it, others hide from it, from household names to people who have found themselves in the spotlight. Join me, Courtney Act, on 1+1 as I speak to well-known Australians about what fame means to them.
1+1 with Courtney Act, tomorrow 9:35 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Come on a trip down memory lane with 6 iconic Australians.
Very nice to be with you, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm ready.
Where'd you get that?
You touched my heart. The ABC of starts Tuesday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
This is an historic day.
Prime Minister told Parliament that
Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Greg Jennett with you from Parliament House here on Ngunnawal country this Wednesday. And the way has been cleared for Eastern Australia's electricity market to return to regular operation in around a day and a half from now after that extraordinary suspension of normal trading by the operator, AEMO. That was last week. Not only has winter's cold weather passed just a little anyway, but we're told coal and gas supplies are a bit more secure now, so generators are firing up to make more electricity once again. That has enabled the market operator to signal that the suspension of the market can progressively come off, and when it does, things will never be the same again, because the recent crisis has apparently opened the energy industry's eyes to problems that beset it, and governments and regulators have recognised the need for a better functioning market too.
In relation to the generators, I've made clear, AEMO has our full support of the actions they've taken. I've made clear again this morning, the Australian Energy Regulator, through Ms Savage, remains very vigilant to their behaviour. I'm not here to comment on the particular activities of any particular generator, other than to reinforce the federal government's expectation that all generators, and I'm sure I'm joined with all my state and territory colleagues, that generators bid into the market as they're required to do as a matter of law.
We'll absolutely be working very closely with the regulator and the Energy Markets Commission on a series of actions that do take steps to prevent this from happening again. It's not a place where the market operator wants to be in suspending the market, and so we're looking at we'll obviously undertake a detailed investigation together with the regulator and others, understand comprehensively the lessons learned and put in place actions so that it doesn't happen again.
The Prime Minister's taken aim at Adam Bandt over his practice of removing the Australian flag from video cameras when he's holding media conferences. The Greens leader maintains the national flag is a symbol of, in his words, dispossession, so he restricts himself to using the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags at events that he controls. In his first public comments on this subject, Anthony Albanese has called on all elected representatives to put unity first, especially in the countdown to a future referendum to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution and through a voice to Parliament.
I'm always very proud to stand in front of the Australian flag, and I think anyone who is a member of the Australian Parliament should do so as well. I was quite surprised by the comments that were made. Reconciliation is about bringing people together on the journey that we need to undertake. It's undermined if people look for division rather than look for unity. Marion Scrimgeour and a range of other people who I respect, Marcia Langton and others, have made strong comments, and I respect them. And I just say to Mr. Bandt that he needs to think about the responses that have been made and reconsider his position and work to promote unity and work to promote reconciliation.
Well, the Queensland Treasurer yesterday handed down a budget for the new financial year with mining and business tax hikes embedded within it. And that's made Cameron Dick a target today in the State Parliament's question time, especially in light of election commitments made back in 2020 that there wouldn't be any tax increases. The Treasurer joins us now live from Brisbane. Welcome, Mr. Dick. Yeah, quite a post-budget question time you faced today, and peppered with this quote, "There will not be any increased taxes." What's the distinction? That looks like a pretty clear statement to me. What's the distinction you're now trying to put around that?
Oh, we made it very clear in the election, Greg, and good afternoon to you and your viewers. We made it very clear that there would be no new or increased taxes on the people of Queensland. We didn't make that promise to corporations. We didn't make it to coal companies or to offshore betting companies. We made it very clear what our promise was, and we've delivered on that. And the reason we know that is that, of course, coal companies, the Queensland Resources
Council campaigned against us all the way through the election after I made that promise. They knew the promise didn't apply to them, which is why they campaigned to continue a royalties freeze beyond 30 June this year. We didn't agree with that. We made that clear. We provided them with 10 years. 10 years of certainty, a 10-year freeze for royalties, and now we're putting in a new royalty regime to fund regional hospitals, to support mental health care and to support the delivery of a record health budget across Queensland.
Yeah, I'll step you through the royalties arrangements in just a moment, but just on this distinction being made between promises to business as against promises to people. By that standard, if any politician, let's say the Federal Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, adopted that, then corporate taxes and levies could all be increased, contrary to statements that he and the Prime Minister had made in the recent federal election. So when is a tax increase not a broken promise, given the litany of these quotes that are on the record at various levels of government, but yours particularly?
Oh, we've been very clear, and Jim Chalmers is a good mate of mine, and they've been very clear too about the commitments they've made to the people. We've delivered on that. We've been very clear in what we've said and now what we're delivering. And of course, if that wasn't the case, companies would not have campaigned against the government after I made that promise. They knew very clearly the promise didn't apply to them. If they knew that it was something that applied to them, they would have said nothing, but they didn't. They campaigned against us. They demanded we increase and extend the freeze on royalties. We didn't do that. We promised to keep to a 10-year freeze, and now we've implemented a new regime of royalties in Queensland for the benefit of the people of our state who deserve the benefit of that windfall profit those coal companies and other companies have made.
Okay, so this is for those who don't know or who are outside of your state, this is a 3-tier new royalty scheme that replaces the 10-year-old one that was going to expire. Now, on average, over the 4 years, I think it nets out at about $300 million a year in extra revenue, on average, coming to your government. And now, we all know that coal prices are running very hot at the moment. What's the per price tonnage that your budget, or per tonne price, I should say, that your budget assumes in coming up with these forecasts?
Well, you're right, Greg. We've done a longer-term forecast that we think it will raise about $1.2 billion over 4 years. But in the medium term, and fairly quickly, in fact, Treasury thinks those record prices that our coal companies have received will come off pretty quickly. So we're not budgeting this spike in royalties into the future. We're not locking that in. We've taken a prudent approach. But when that price is above $150, where it's been at a maximum royalty level of 15% for a decade, when it goes beyond 150, and it has, metallurgical coal's been $500 a tonne, it's spiked to $900 a tonne, extraordinary, unprecedented prices for coal. We say the people of our state should get a slice of that windfall to go back into regional healthcare, into regional hospitals in particular. So that's what it's about. But when the prices come down again, coal companies will pay exactly what they've been paying for the last 10 years. So we think it's fair and reasonable to the coal companies and fair and reasonable to our people that we take a little bit of that windfall profit and put it back into healthcare in particular.
Sure, and this presumed fall or resumption to normal coal prices that are embedded in the budget, have you tested that against all the more recent predictions about Europe's demand for coal in the event of the war in Ukraine and the dislocating effect that has had on Asian demand as well? What gives you the confidence that prices are going to dip down below where they are now, just over $500 a tonne?
Well, our Treasury officials are, of course, some of the most experienced analysts when it comes to resources in this state, in fact, in the nation. So they've spent, many of them have spent their careers monitoring, analysing and focusing on the resources industry, coal in particular. As you know, Queensland is a big coal producer. So I'm confident with the analysis that they've done. I accept their work. We've got some of the best resources economists in the country in Queensland Treasury. So I'll rely on their on their work. But the point is this, Greg, we are taking a slice of that windfall to put it back into the essential services that Queenslanders deserve. And that's where it will go into new hospitals in places like Moranbah, Mackay, Townsville, in our regional cities where we know the resources industry means so much.
Can I take you to the other business tax, which I think comes with a title mental health levy, but it is in effect a payroll tax across two levels of companies, those with a payroll over $10 million and then a higher rate for those over $100 million. I thought it was the intention of governments around the country to try and lower these things, if not eradicate them, because they're held to be anti-jobs or they drive business interstate. Why won't that be the case in Queensland?
Well, the wealth of Queenslanders is dependent on the health of Queenslanders. And we know mental health in a way that perhaps we've not really focused on before the pandemic. We know the mental health of Queenslanders and Australians has been challenged at this difficult time. So we need to support not only those individuals and families who need help with mental illness, the challenge of mental illness. We know there is an economic benefit that comes from that. Alan Fells, you know Alan well, a very distinguished economist, one of the thought leaders in mental health. You know, a 25% reduction in the incidence of mental health in Australia would lead to a 2.5% increase in GDP. Sure. And that would blow away any tax reform that you could possibly deliver. So what we're doing, a targeted measure on 1% of Queensland companies to benefit Queenslanders living with the challenge of mental illness, and to give you some, you and your viewers, some assurance, that money by law will be quarantined and ring-fenced for use solely for mental health. So this is a sustainable funding source for mental health, which our states never had. We've had a parliamentary report ask us to do that, and we've now delivered that, which I think will be good for the individuals and families, but just as good for our state economy.
All right, and one thing you didn't do, but I think around the same time we were getting a New South Wales budget, was to look at the other perennial in tax reform discussions, which is stamp duty. They're quite clearly moving towards an annual property tax mechanism. Do you ever assess that the time would be right, or when might the time be right for Queensland to head down that path away from stamp duty?
Well, New South Wales' proposal really is dependent on an enormous contribution from the federal government, multi-billions of dollars to go back to New South Wales to make it work. We've got one of the most competitive and affordable stamp duty regimes in the country. If New South Wales was to come down to our level and do what we did to take the burden off homeowners and people purchasing property, then we'd have a look at it. But, Greg, to be honest with you, I'm not in the business of putting a new tax on the houses of old people or anyone else. We have a competitive, affordable stamp duty regime, and I look forward to seeing how this actually can be executed by the New South Wales government, and whether it's solely dependent on a greater share of GST going to New South Wales, which I wouldn't support at this time.
Well, as ever, I'm sure that's going to be the subject of your next discussion with colleagues across the border and elsewhere. Cameron Dick, thanks for joining us on Afternoon Briefing today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Greg.
All right, record amounts of underpayment by employers to their workers have been uncovered in recent years, amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars collectively. The driving force behind investigations and then making business pay their due amount to workers has been through the Fair Work Ombudsman. Now, it's flagged the target industries that it'll be running its eye over in the financial year about to begin, and universities are high on the list. So the Fair Work Ombudsman, Sandra Parker, explained why this is so when we spoke to her just a little earlier. Well, Sandra Parker, in putting universities on notice that you'll be having a look at their pay performance compliance in the year ahead, you've also said that a lot of this has been informed by the universities themselves. What exactly have they self-reported? What exactly have they told you about potential underpayments in the sector?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So the university sector has been on our radar for a little while, following some reports of underpayments, and they came through requests from assistance from staff at the universities that were alleging they were underpaid, through to some media stories on some universities, individual universities. But it became an issue to the point where I wrote to the universities, the vice chancellors and their boards, and asked them to look into this issue and to assure themselves that they were paying their staff correctly. But since then, quite a number have come forward and self-reported underpayments and indicated to us that they would work with us on auditing those underpayments and pay the money back as soon as they could.
These are big organisations, typically big enterprises. Do you have any appreciation at the outset what amounts of money might in aggregate be involved here?
We don't have aggregate figures, but we know that there are significant underpayments that will run to millions of dollars. And that will vary from university to university. One of the things that we think is important as the regulator is that we provide assurance to the workers and to the community and to the funders that we are checking and making sure that the assessment of those underpayments is actually correct and that it's paid back. We also ask that interest be paid where it's been happening over a number of years. And that also we require other things such as apologies, fixing up payroll systems, training HR and other staff, making sure that it's not going to happen again because we would like it to stop happening. So we'll help, but we expect the unis to sort themselves out and to ensure it's going to work properly into the future.
Yeah, we'll look at some other sectors in a moment, but one last one on universities. What is it about their features of, human resources, payroll? What is it that they have in common that makes them susceptible, if you like, or more likely to underpay?
Yeah, there are some patterns. What we're observing is generally poor governance and management oversight practices. Often a sort of set and forget. There's been an assumption made by the university executive that the systems are okay. They haven't been checking them. And there's an issue with faculties and schools doing their own payroll, their own hiring, their own management of staff, and they've been all doing it slightly differently, which means you get non-compliance happening quite quickly when that occurs. They haven't been investing appropriately, in our view, in payroll and time recording systems. A key thing here is they do need to keep pay records, time records to show what staff are actually doing, particularly casual staff who are paid by the hour. And the other thing I would say is they do need to make sure they've got experts managing payroll, not just academic managers, and that's a bit of a pattern that we've observed as well. Okay, well, that's a body of work ahead of you. Not surprisingly, Sandra Parker, you will once again be looking at fast food, hospitality, cafes and agriculture. All of those would, in my mind, have one thing in common at the moment. That is that they are finding it hard to get staff, and some employer groups tell us paying higher wages. What's the trend that you detect across those sectors? Is that in fact true, or are they continuing to not meet their obligations? The fast food restaurants and cafes sector and agriculture are priorities because of their nature. They are often businesses that have high turnover of staff. They take on young people, often casuals. They have pretty tight margins, and they'll be tighter, of course, with the recent pay increases that start from 1 July and after. We're very aware of that. So when we find non-compliance, we do take account of their financial circumstances in giving them longer to pay back money if they owe it. So we've always taken account of those sort of circumstances. It doesn't mean they don't have to pay the money. They actually, if the money's owed to the worker, it does have to be paid. And if they're not cooperating around that, we will take them to court. But there's no question there's pressure. that pressure is increasing, and we do take account of that.
All right, and when you mention taking firms to court, quite clearly most people would be aware that some of the biggest, brand names in the country have in fact been taken to court by Fair Work for underpayment. What can you tell us about cases that are outstanding, still on the horizon for the year ahead? Will there be more of the likes of Woolworths, Coles and CBA?
Yes, we're we're currently investigating around 50 corporate sector employers. And as you mentioned, we've commenced legal proceedings against Woolworths Group Limited and Woolworths South Australia Limited. We also have legal proceedings against Coles. These are very large companies, and we're taking the matters really seriously. But there's a lot of work we're doing with corporates. It's fair to say that corporates are putting a lot more attention on this issue, and we welcome that. But there's a long way to go before the community and employees can be assured that they're getting it right.
Okay, and just on compliance and I suppose the unit that you run, what are the resources that you deploy over the current year to pursue some of these matters?
Well, we are a national regulator, so we have 22 offices across Australia, and that includes a proportion of those are inspectors who actually go out to workplaces. Very pleased that post-COVID or transitioning from COVID, those inspectors are back in the field, which is fantastic. But we have an annual appropriation. We deploy those staff based on risk. So that's why I've announced annual priorities. That is largely around our proactive work. So what is our discretionary work? And we hone in on that based on intelligence and risk and factors that say, these are the areas we really need to be putting most of our effort. Quite clearly, we can't be in 1 million workplaces, which is what we regulate. So we take a risk-based approach.
Yeah, well, you've certainly signalled your intentions for the year ahead. Sandra Parker, thanks for sharing some of that workload with us this afternoon on Afternoon Briefing.
Thanks very much for your time.
Now, Australia's joining efforts by G20 nations to tackle future pandemics by tipping money into a global fund. This initiative has been led and will be set up by the World Bank, and it'll target gaps in preparedness for pandemics and as well as response measures, particularly when it comes to developing nations. Now, Dr. Michael Moore is an adjunct professor at the University of Canberra, former president of the World Federation of Public Health Associations and a long-time watcher and advocate of all these things. He joins us now. Michael Moore, great to see you again. Can I start with the question, pretty simple, I suppose. Financial Intermediary Fund, that's what they're calling it. What is it exactly?
Well, it's a fund that has been set up by the World Bank to ensure that countries contribute to making sure that at the next pandemic, we're much more prepared than we were for this one, and hopefully to use the money to have a look at where we did well, where we did poorly, and to make sure that we can get a better coordination, recognising, of course, that viruses don't respect borders.
So only coordination. Would it fund a stockpile of equipment, expertise, vaccine supplies, etc., or is it simply a coordination body or mechanism?
So the fund has just been announced, and we're looking to see each of those things, Greg. I think that it's really important that it hold expertise, that it does manage stockpiles. The downside to managing stockpiles of things like vaccines is that it may well be an entirely different pandemic. And just as with COVID, vaccines needed to be developed. It's not so long ago that we did not have a vaccine at all for this pandemic. And then, of course, what we needed to do was to respond incredibly quickly. The downside and the lesson learned was very wealthy countries quickly put their hands on the supplies of vaccines, and places like Africa didn't have them. And the result was an Omicron variant because the disease spread more quickly and there was more opportunity for variance.
Sure. It's one thing to tip money into a pot, though, but to actually achieve the objectives that are being outlined here, it takes a degree of cross-border cooperation between nations too. What would lead you to think that that is possible through this project? We've already said it's being run by the World Bank, noticeably not by the World Health Organization. But what says that goodwill and cooperation is there?
So there's sort of two parts to my answer here, Greg. The first one is to have finance, economics and health working together, and an understanding amongst financial organisations that health has a very, very significant impact on economics is fundamental. So those of us who work in public health have known that for forever. What we're seeing is a recognition amongst economists and financial workers, and that's a big advantage of having the World Bank involved there. We have, of course, been arguing for a pandemic treaty for some time, and that is being considered by the World Health Organization and the World Health Assembly. Of course, if we do get a pandemic treaty, it will be only the second international health treaty that we've had at all. The first one is the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and it did make a huge difference about how countries dealt with tobacco and how they use them, and as such has saved many, many, many lives. So those of us who work in public health think that this financial intermediary fund is a first step. We need to work together, but the World Health Organization needs to work with the World Bank and other elements of the United Nations to ensure that we get a seriously coordinated approach.
Is distrust, even if it's not universal, it's certainly held in pockets around the globe, is distrust of China a lingering impediment to the sort of cooperation that you're talking about?
Interestingly enough, China has worked quite hard to coordinate with many countries, and, they provided Sinovac and their other vaccines to many developing countries. So in this respect, I think that we can expect that China will be involved in dealing with future pandemics and coordinating with other countries in terms of future pandemics. Now, we know the economic differences, the trade differences, and those sorts of areas. But in health, I think we've actually seen a pretty positive approach from China in sharing the information that they had in terms of the pandemic. Now, that might not apply to going back and looking at where it came from and so forth. But in terms of dealing with the pandemic once it was there, I think we can expect a coordinated approach from that huge country. Look, there's probably going to be exceptions. And with all of these things, it's the nature of politics and international politics. Nothing's perfect, but we keep working towards the best possible outcome, or if you like, the least worst situation.
Sure thing. Sounds like this is a bit of a building block towards something, even if we never quite get towards the full-blown treaty. You're obviously somewhat optimistic about it.
I am optimistic, and I think that we've had such an important lesson from the COVID pandemic, and things are just starting to get better. I suspect we'll see another wave. Let's hope we don't. But on the other hand, I note in Australia that we've stopped asking people to wear masks. It's clear that we couldn't continue with lockdowns. But I think we were pretty quick in pulling out some of the other measures that we had in place, particularly for really large gatherings. And so I suspect we're going to see some increase in spread, and that may in turn go in internationally. And that's why we need countries internationally to coordinate. Yeah. We know the impact this has also on trade, on our financial circumstances and so on. And that's actually, I presume, why the World Bank is involved. And in this case, we have the Treasurer and the Health Minister committing. By the way, just as in the former government, the Treasurer and Health Minister worked together to try and resolve problems with the issue of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, certainly not over yet. Michael Moore, great to hear your thoughts on these things. As always, we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, workers providing services in the National Disability Insurance Scheme have been awarded wage rises, or at least the potential for them, under a federal government decision announced today and covering the new financial year. Seems to be a common theme of our discussions today, all set about the next financial year. Disability Services Minister Bill Shorten's been travelling the country assessing the scheme, and he joins us now from his Melbourne office. Bill Shorten, can I just start on some news that developed in my previous discussion? This is around some changes with officials and secretaries of departments within the federal government, notably at the Foreign Affairs Department. Catherine Campbell, the secretary there, is moving on. She's going to be replaced by Jan Adams. A number of reshuffles. I won't run through all of them, but Catherine Campbell, of course, had been head of human services under Robodebt. No one ran harder on that than you. Is she paying a price for that now? Do you welcome her removal from DFAT?
Oh, listen, I separate the matters. The Prime Minister's just announced the appointment of a range of very talented public servants to senior positions, including Jan Adams as the new Secretary of DFAT. I'm sure Jan, with her marvellous background of experience across the world representing Australia's interests, will do an outstanding job, and the Prime Minister's thanked Ms Campbell for her service. In terms of the Robodebt Royal Commission, I have no idea who will be called to that. Myself and the Attorney-General are working hard on doing the preparatory work to make sure that the Robodebt Royal Commission is speedy, it's effective, it gets to the bottom of how on earth could $2 billion of debts be unlawfully raised against nearly 500,000 Australians, many of whom were vulnerable, with no legislative authority, and of course with a very cruel trail of destruction and unfairness.
Yeah, but whether called or not to that Royal Commission, do you agree it would have been untenable for Catherine Campbell to remain, in a very senior position in a very important department at the same time that her previous roles and culpabilities were being examined in that forum?
Oh, listen, I have no idea about that. The Prime Minister would have taken professional advice, and I don't assume that the matters are linked at all, so I don't think that's fair to Ms Campbell to say otherwise. The Prime Minister has taken his soundings, and right across the senior executive of Australia's public service, some existing leaders have been kept on and some new blood's been brought in. I think it seems, I've only just glanced at the press release, and it seems to be a very exciting mix of some of the best and brightest to lead Australia's Commonwealth Public Service.
Yeah, as I say, I won't go through the many movements. There are a few of them there. Just finally, though, if you had a say, I know you won't be a Royal Commissioner, you're a Minister, but would you welcome Catherine Campbell's appearance to be held to account, or at least to be questioned when that commission begins?
Oh, I think the matter's more serious than just nominating individuals. I don't want to interfere with the work of the Royal Commission. We want to establish it. It shouldn't take too long, but I do think we need to understand how the Morrison government for 4 years effectively, unlawfully punished, abused its power in the pursuit of people when it didn't have the legal authority to claim debts. We need to get to the bottom of that. The old government did settle at the door of the court, and I believe, and I don't have insight, but my gut tells me that when they settled the class action at the door of the court, part of the incentive to settle it was they didn't want to see key people give evidence. The Royal Commission will fill that gap in the public's knowledge to make sure that it can never happen again. And it really was a shocking abuse of power by the Morrison government. And listen, we don't have to dwell on it. The Royal Commission shouldn't go that long, I don't think. But I think we do. Australians, especially the victims of an unlawful scheme, campaign waged by their own government, are owed an explanation about why.
And it will be watched and reported closely, I'm sure. Can I take you back to the NDIS? Now, you've made some significant announcements today. What's called price limits for services, maybe not well understood by those outside of the scheme. These will deliver to support workers potential pay rises of up to 9%. We're talking more than 250,000 workers here. 9% quite obviously would outstrip inflation. Is that deliberate?
Well, let's unpack it. The NDIS has a funding envelope. This is within it. So the new announcement has already been budgeted by the old government and by ourselves. So it's not for people listening out there, their ears will prick up. It's money already forecast to be spent. Right. But what happens annually is they review the prices so that NDIS participants get individual packages. What we're doing is honouring the Fair Work Commission's pay rise of 4.6%. Super's going up for people another 0.5%. So there's no surprises there, but people with disabilities pay for these services. The government pays people with disability their packages of support. So we want to make sure that people with disabilities, in honouring the minimum wage rises, don't have to cut back on the hours of support they receive. So the government, as it should, is providing the safety net. Effectively, it means that disability carers, who are amongst some of our lower paid but hardest working Australians, will see an improvement in their bottom line in their wages, north of 5%. The other thing which goes into the mix is it's part of this payment of the price rises, which is given to individual participants to be able to afford services. There's a recognition that a lot of registered service providers have done it tough. They've got overheads, you've got to train your workforce, you've got to get the rosters right. There's changes to the award which see people being paid more for minimum shifts and the number of hours they're able to work at a particular place. So what this is doing is it's making sure that the scheme can be reformed, but it's not doing it by starving participants or disability carers.
Yeah, can you explain the linkage, though, between the price limits, which you have just explained at length, and those end users with their actual plans? I mean, they are paying at the end of the line here. Do their plans go up by 9%, or has their purchasing power been eroded in any way?
You've nailed it. No, you've nailed it. What we do is by increasing the prices, what it means is that when a person might have 10 hours of carer support a week, we're increasing the disabled person's package by the amount that wages are going up. So, in fact, the purchasing power of the person with a disability isn't eroded, but the disability carer is getting appropriate and legal wage increases. So, no, the price increase goes to the package that the individual participant on the scheme gets, and what it means is that they're able to pay the extra remuneration to the disability carer, the extra $1 an hour or $1.50 or $2 an hour, without it diminishing the purchasing power of the person's package.
Yeah, okay. So you already
confused you more.
No, we understand it perfectly. Bill Shorten, you've already outlined that this latest announcement was already budgeted for and in many ways factored in by the previous government. I think you've said elsewhere that the NDIS budget for the financial year we're in now, but which is about to end, may be slightly underspent. You've been in the job long enough now. Have you satisfied yourself that perhaps some of the more drastic budget predictions for NDIS spending going out over the next decade may be also overstated?
Oh, it's early days. There's just one thing I do need to clarify. The previous government didn't assume that the Fair Work Commission was going to increase wages by 5%.
Yeah.
But the point about it is there's, in the envelope of funding, there is enough to cover that rise, so the participant's not worse off and the 250,000 disability carers, many of them can see an improvement in their conditions. I think it's early days to say whether or not the stated, 10-year projections are too dramatic or not. My hunch is that whether or not they're too dramatic or not, there are improvements we can make to the bottom line of the scheme. The first thing is changing the notion of the scheme as being just a cost to an investment. I think that's the first part of the conversation we have. In other words, if we as Australia invest in these 500,000 people, many of them who are severely and profoundly disabled, if we invest in their early childhood intervention, that has a return. Also, when we invest in adults with a disability, that generates jobs, it generates better quality of life. So the first part of do I think the predictions are overly dramatic is I want to start asking, are we getting the outcomes that we are expecting for the money we spend? Then the next thing we've got to do is make sure money's not being wasted. I want to tackle the legacy cases. There's 4,500 cases at court right now. Like, this is a ridiculous waste of government money fighting with disabled people, and I just want to see if there are cheaper, more empathetic ways of, alternative dispute resolution rather than pushing people to the door of the court.
Yeah.
I also think it's time to talk to the states constructively about, we can't have the NDIS as the only lifeboat in the ocean. There've got to be other supports, and my colleague Amanda Rishworth and the states, we're all going to work on the landscape beyond the NDIS so that it doesn't become the scheme of last resort for people who lack other supports which should be provided by states.
And I see that conversation was started, somewhat encouragingly anyway, last Friday at your meeting.
Yeah,
we've checked in at regular intervals and a big body of work lies ahead, so we'll do that again before too long. Bill Shorten, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks. And it's good news for disability carers and participants today. I'm happy for them. Cheers.
All right. Well, the Prime Minister's preparing for another overseas jaunt, this time to the NATO summit in Madrid. But he may have another stop on his itinerary. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has extended an invitation for Australia's Prime Minister to travel to Kyiv, showing solidarity with the Ukrainian people in their war against invading Russian forces. It's a relatively well-worn path for international leaders, albeit a slightly longer one, given the difficulties getting to Ukraine at the moment. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi made the trip in the last week via train in from Poland. Now, whether Mr Albanese will head there after the summit remains uncertain.
We'll take advice from the national security agencies and from Defence, and we'll respond to that advice as appropriate down the track. I will visit NATO and the NATO conference. I spoke to Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, just yesterday. That will be an important conference an important summit because of what is happening in Ukraine. It is the first time that you will have the leaders of Korea, of South Korea, of Japan, New Zealand and Australia have all been invited, and we've all accepted the invitation to be NATO partners.
All right, well, time to review some of the running national affairs topics of the week now. Joining our Wednesday panel today, Assistant Trade Minister Tim Ayres is here in the Parliament House studio. Welcome, Tim. And from Wagga Wagga, Nationals MP Michael McCormack. Welcome back, Michael. I might start with Tim. Yeah, welcome. And a breaking bit of news that's happened while we're on air today. Just discussed it with Bill Shorten. Shake-up, reasonably substantial, of departmental secretaries in your own portfolio of DFAT, a new secretary in Jan Adams. Same question as put to Bill Shorten. Is Catherine Campbell, the outgoing secretary, paying a price here for robo-debt?
Well, I'd echo Bill's response. I was lucky enough to be in the studio listening to your interview. He's right. I mean, what's interesting about this set of appointments is there is some fresh blood, some fresh leadership in there. Right from the appointment of Glyn Davis as head of Prime Minister and Cabinet through to these new appointments, it shows two things. One is, of course, with a change in government, new priorities, some new leadership there, but a deep respect from Anthony Albanese and this government for the work of the public service. There is, of course, some changeover. But what I'm expecting is really strong leadership from that group of new public service heads, and I'll be very excited to be in there working with Jan Adams, who'll be a terrific head for the Department of Foreign Affairs. She's
certainly very accomplished,
very well credentialed.
I know Anthony Albanese had said before the election, no night of the long knives, no day of the long knives in this case. No names, no pack drill, though. Was there a perception within the Albanese government that there might have been some political leanings in the Secretaries Club that needed to be dealt with early.
I think I had some pretty robust exchanges with Phil Gaetjens as the former head of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and I was concerned about the direction of the relationship between the Morrison government and the public service. And so there were, on the record, there was quite some robust exchanges there. But what this shows is we've appointed new leadership in some of those areas, maintained. There are a lot of experienced faces there, current secretaries who've maintained their role. I think we've got the balance right. You're right. No night of the long knives. No precipitous changes. It's a steady, methodical approach. There are still some appointments to come, I see, including in the Department of Industry and other of the portfolio areas that I'll be working in. We're really committed to having a strong public service and the right relationship between political leadership in the government and the public service.
All right, that's the government perspective from Tim, Michael, but you, of course, will have worked with some of the outgoing and, for that matter, some of the ongoing secretaries. I don't know if you've had time to peruse the list, but do you think there's anything untoward or, entirely acceptable here?
I'll just make this point, Greg, that I know when Scott Morrison became Prime Minister, he called all the secretaries in and he certainly made it clear that he wanted them to work for the people of Australia. And I was most impressed by that meeting. Let's not besmirch the reputation and what has been done by our secretaries, by our public servants. They are, as Tim quite correctly pointed out, fine people, and they do a very, very good job for it on behalf of Australians and certainly regional Australians. And I know I work very closely with Stephen Kennedy in Treasury and Simon Atkinson in infrastructure, and they put their heart and soul into their roles in what was a very, very difficult period, dealing with drought, bushfires, floods, mouse plagues, and, of course, COVID-19.
Yeah, well, can I come back to you, Michael? We'll change tack at this point to another sort of running story of the day. Energy market, it is ostensibly going to return to normal operations, but will it ever be the same again, do you think? The rules might be reapplied in the next 24 hours or so, but the pressure points, coal prices, gas prices, are they still there?
Well, Mr Albanese told the Australian people the solution to everybody's problems was to elect an Albanese government. That's what's happened. And, it's all well and good to say we inherited all these problems, but the fact remains there is a problem. There is a difficulty. He needs to work with states closely. He needs to work with stakeholders very closely and to sort this out. And a rush to renewables, as Adam Bant would have us go down, it's a rush to despair because, yes, we need emission reductions, and that's what we were doing as a coalition government, and we were doing it, meeting and beating all our international obligations. But we've got a situation now that needs fixing, and I very much hope for those people who are shivering in their homes this very cold winter that problem is solved. Yeah,
there's a sense of relief, Tim Ayres, upon hearing from AEMO that the market comes back to normal, that it might come back to normal, but can people really be assured that we've learnt all the lessons of the last, what are we saying, week to 2 weeks?
Well, when AEMO intervened, we welcomed that. That was a very important intervention. It was the right thing to happen. Of course, the worst of this current crisis has passed. But our capacity to respond was hampered by a decade of policy failure. That's the problem. That's the lesson that the former government, the coalition parties, have got to learn. A decade of policy inaction made it tougher to respond. Now we've got some short-term challenges in front of us to work through in all areas of the energy market, in gas and electricity. But what we have achieved is a policy framework that is certain, that provides a certain framework for investment. And we've got consensus around that policy framework. And we've got business, the farmers, the trade union movement, the environment movement, all of the reputable energy experts supporting the Labor policy framework. That's our job, to go and implement that framework. While we're in an environment where 9 years of policy inaction has made the problems that Australians are facing worse, I think it's important that the government does what we said we were going to do and gets in, does all the things that were endorsed in the last election, I wouldn't take too many lectures from the previous government about energy policy certainty, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, it has been an ongoing conversation. Michael, you mentioned, referenced Adam Bandt in that previous question about...
You'll be pleased to see the flags behind me.
You're taking my cue. There you go. Adam Bandt's position on the Australian flag. Prime Minister Albanese weighed in today and, personally urged some reflection on this, not dividing the nation. Would you welcome his intervention?
Oh, look, I agree with the Prime Minister on this. I mean, many Australians have died. We've got 102,500 names on the honour roll at the Australian War Memorial who have actually made sure that they fought for this nation. And many of them, certainly throughout World War II, fought under this flag. And it's a proud flag. I'm proud to stand beside it, in front of it, behind it, wherever I might need to. And I really like Keith Pitt's comments. Maybe it's not that Adam Bandt removed himself from the flag, it's the flag removed himself from Adam Bandt.
And Tim, I don't think you're going to see any departure from convention, are you, as far as the ministry is concerned? Would you still proudly stand in front of the Australian flag at all public events?
Yes, of course, and that's what Australians expect us to do, and they're right to. I mean, what I saw yesterday was some of the most empty gesture politics, university Trotskyite sort of politics. There ought to be a bit of growing up around the place. And a bit of self-reflection is absolutely in order for Mr. Bandt and his colleagues.
Yep, all right. Now, there's so much more. Well, on that note, with a bit of bipartisanship from both of you, because of unfolding events and a prolonged conversation with Bill Shorten, we're not going to get through everything we wanted to today, but we'll get you back again before too long to kick around a few more issues. Tim Ayres and Michael McCormack, thanks for joining us, both of you.
Good on you, Greg. See you, Michael.
I'll see you, Tim.
All right, so finally, let's go to the City of Adelaide, which has been wrestling with the vexed issue of technology and privacy in and around public places. The council last night held a special meeting to try to put to rest consternation in the community about potential for facial recognition to be captured and processed by authorities. This is through a network of soon-to-be-updated CCTV cameras. Adelaide City Lord Mayor Sandy Verschoor joined us a little earlier to discuss this. Sandy Verschoor, welcome to Afternoon Briefing. For those who are outside of your state or outside of your city and not familiar with the premise of this special meeting that was held by Council last night, why was it considering, first of all, this upgrade to the CCTV network in Adelaide, and what would that upgrade have been capable of?
So I think, first of all, welcome to everybody, and I'm here on Kaurna land in Adelaide. So the City of Adelaide is responsible for the CCTV camera infrastructure, which is, of course, monitored by the police. So our existing network is quite old. They need to be replaced. And so we are purchasing new cameras. Now, this was done as part of the city deal between the City of Adelaide, the state government and the federal government. When we were purchasing that, we realised that the legislation hasn't kept up with the technology. So there is obviously facial recognition technology that is available. We made a decision last November that we wanted to make sure there was legislation in place through the Australian, in keeping with the Australian Human Rights Commission and also with the Law Council, so that that technology was used in the right way.
And there was a backlash against this, obviously, because was it a communications issue or some other reason why the debate flourished about the capability or the capacity for facial recognition, even though I think you're telling us that was never the intention?
No, look, it's not about intention, it's about capability. And the backlash was because I wrote to the police to basically say we wanted to make sure there was legislation in place for this new technology, and they basically wrote back and said thank you. What we didn't realise, so it is a miscommunication, is that the project manager, given we'd had that discussion last year and given we'd made that decision, had then decided that we would exclude the facial recognition technology or the software license from our procurement. So we haven't bought it. It has been excluded. Of course, all cameras, all the new cameras are capable of having that technology, but we as the city have not procured that technology.
Okay, so Sandy, where does last night's meeting and its resolutions leave that? I mean, can we say that forever, council or any third party, let's say SA Police, would never buy the software capacity to run facial detection across your footage?
We can't say never, and of course, SAPOL, the South Australian Police, may have their own cameras and they may be using that technology. We don't have any control over that. What we're really pushing for is to make sure that there is work done at a federal level around legislation, around privacy rights and how that technology will be applied, and we'll continue to champion that. It was also exacerbated by an external group who are worried about the use of that technology. There was an article, I think, by Choice magazine only a few weeks ago, which was about some chains, retail chains, using that technology themselves. And so it was about how do we push forward. It's an example where the legislation and the technology haven't kept up. Yeah. So we are really pushing for that. But we look after what is in our control. And within our control, yes, we have bought and are implementing or installing new CCTV cameras, but it does not have the facial recognition technology with them.
And so reaching some sort of resolution on this question, and very publicly at a special meeting last night, do you believe this has instilled public confidence and trust that until this legal grey area might be cleared up, let's say nationally, it's certainly not a City of Adelaide issue, that people will now accept there is no plan and no capability?
I'm hoping they accept that the project that we're working on, which is to replace the old cameras, does not have that technology. We have not bought the software license, so we've bought the management system and the cameras themselves. So at this point, we have made a decision for this council that we will not purchase that technology. Obviously, we'll supply the cameras. Now, what I am pleased about, and this is which your listeners also may be pleased about, is that this has sparked a national conversation. It has meant that we've had conversation not only with the police, but with the Attorney General and with our federal counterparts to basically say we need this legislation in place and to protect all people's privacy.
And so where do you think that might lead prospectively, Sandy? Do you sense in your contact with federal authorities, if we start there, that there is an appetite to try to address this in some unified national way?
I believe there is. I believe there is an appetite, and this has been driven very much by the Australian Human Rights Commission and the Law Council as well. So working with those institutions and working on a federal level, given that this technology is now available, we need to make sure as a country that we are using this properly and appropriately and making sure that we look after everybody's rights.
Yeah, because just finally, I mean, in a sense, the biometric data, our facial image, that is being captured all the time by these cameras anyway. What we are talking about, is this not true, is, the software that and the systems, the human rights protections, I suppose, that sit over that.
Yeah, it's the policy protection. So it's just making sure that the legislation and the technology are talking to each other. I mean, we use biometric data all the time. I have an iPhone. I use my face, to get into my iPhone. I have probably 100 apps on there, which is getting all of my information all of the time. So, but this is really about how we're going to use that CCTV camera network and how we're going to use the technology. And the police have a job to do, and we understand that, but we need to make sure that the policy and the legislation is in place to protect people's rights.
Well, in its own way, the City of Adelaide has certainly shone a light on this issue, whether it intended to or not, and it is going to be a national conversation, I'm sure. Sandy Verschoor, thanks so much for joining us once again.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
And that is just about it on our wrap of national affairs for today from the team here in Canberra, with a few developments happening around us. You can keep up to date if you're interested in that reshuffle we were discussing, referring to, of secretaries within the Anthony Albanese Public Service Administration. That'll be written up and processed on ABC News, so you can read up on that soon. Our team, though, will be back usual time tomorrow. See you then.
More than 250 people killed by a devastating earthquake in southeast Afghanistan. Supply in the energy market to return to normal following last week's intervention by the regulator. A former swim coach charged with the historical sexual abuse of 2 students. And New South Wales Health launches an ambitious strategy to eliminate hepatitis C. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Lara Himes. More than 250 people have been killed by a magnitude 6.1 earthquake in Afghanistan's east. South Asia correspondent Avani Dias joins us now. Avani, early reports are just coming through. What do we know so far?
Well, we know that this is showing signs of a very devastating disaster in eastern Afghanistan. Now, this earthquake hit late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning, but we're just getting reports now of just how big this death toll is. Recently, we've got the number of more than 280 people who've died, but local officials are saying that that number is definitely going to rise over the next hours and days. Now, to give you a bit of a sense of the geography of that area, that is on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. And this area is very hilly and a lot of people live on the bottom of these mountains. So we know that this earthquake would have caused slides. We're seeing images across social media from people living in those areas, which show their houses decimated, rubble everywhere as well. And we're hearing from local officials that they're still making their way through that rubble, trying to find bodies. So certainly fears that this is going to be a very devastating situation in Afghanistan. Now, we also know this earthquake, it was 6.1 on the Richter scale in terms of magnitude, and it was also felt more than 500 kilometres away. So people in Pakistan and India, as well as across Afghanistan, were actually feeling this earthquake. More than 120 million people are said to have felt the tremors from this situation.
And what about aid agencies or how people can access help? Are aid agencies on the ground there?
Well, this is going to be a really interesting point of contention in coming days, especially for the Western world. Now, a deputy spokesman from the Taliban, he has come out and said that he needs more aid agencies to come into these areas to help with the rescue efforts. As I said, this is a very remote part of Afghanistan, but there are many people living there, and they're already sending in helicopters in order to rescue people. But the Taliban is calling for more aid organisations to come forward and assist this situation. And we know that about 8 or so months ago, since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, a number of those aid agencies have actually withdrawn. The Australian government no longer has officials on the ground either, and that's the same with many other Western countries who do not recognise the Taliban as a legitimate government. So this is going to be an issue going forward. We've seen a major economic crisis which has swept through Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover as well. The US has taken away a lot of funding as opposition to the Taliban. So what will come next is, how will these governments react in terms of aid? Will they send in support in order to help the people who have suffered in this disaster?
Avani Dias, thanks so much. The East Coast energy market will begin returning to normal operations from tomorrow morning. Last week, the Australian energy market operator seized control of the market to stabilise the grid amid fears supply shortages would lead to blackouts. Political reporter Noor Haider joins me now from Parliament House. Noor, when will the market return to normal?
Well, there'll be a staged, gradual resumption of normal operations beginning from 4 a.m. tomorrow. As you say, the Australian Energy Market Operator last week made the extraordinary decision to suspend the energy market after days of volatility and soaring wholesale electricity prices, which prompted concerns that there would be blackouts across some of the eastern states. Now, the Australian Energy Market Operator initially imposed a price cap on wholesale electricity prices. It also forced energy operators to provide energy supply even if they were operating at a loss. But it then took the decision to suspend the market in an attempt to try and restore reliability and stability. Now, it says that the conditions have significantly improved since then. Some 4,000 megawatts of energy has been restored. We heard today from the CEO of AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, and he says that starting from 4 a.m. tomorrow, the market will be allowed to set the spot price for electricity. It will then also, 24 hours later, if a number of criteria are then met, it will lift the suspension entirely. Here's some of what Daniel Westerman had to say earlier today.
We'll monitor the market closely for at least 24 hours, and if we see normal market behaviour again, we'll formally lift the suspension. We know that a well-functioning national electricity market is key to ensuring the lowest cost energy to Australian homes and businesses. And this step-by-step approach minimises the risk of seeing the dysfunctional behaviour that led to the market suspension last week.
Now, the Federal Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, says that even though the energy market will be, resuming normal operations from potentially Friday, he says that risks still remain. A number of factors have contributed to the East Coast energy crisis, including Australia's ageing coal-fired power stations, some of which have had planned and unplanned outages over recent weeks. That's also coincided, of course, with the war in Ukraine, which has pushed up the price of Australian coal and gas, and of course winter in Australia, where more people are turning on their heaters to try and stay warm. Now, Mr Bowen says that Australians should have confidence that both the energy operator and the energy regulator are doing everything that they can to ensure stability and affordability, and that they are acting in the best interest of consumers. Here's some of what he had to say earlier today.
Chief Executive has outlined today is, I think, a prudent and carefully managed approach to return to more normal market conditions. Risks remain in the system, and I know that AEMO remains very vigilant about what needs to be cared for in the coming days.
And just on another issue, Noor, the federal government is launching a new campaign to urge Australians to get their COVID booster shots to protect themselves this winter.
Yeah, the Federal Health Minister, Mark Butler, is stressing that COVID is not just a thing of the past. He says that it still poses a serious risk to some Australians. Now, the federal government will be launching this information campaign from tomorrow to urge Australians to go out and get their booster doses, their vaccinations, but also their influenza shots too. Mr Butler says that whilst for many people COVID will now be a mild to moderate illness, there are still some Australians that will experience serious illness due to the virus. And he says that right now in Australia, 1 in 20 hospital beds, which is equivalent to 3,000 hospital beds, currently have COVID patients. This is some of what he had to say.
Bridge, tragically, more than 300 Australians every single week are losing their life to this illness. We are still seeing enormous loss of life, enormous dislocation and massive pressure on our health and our hospital systems. And on top of that, as we all know, influenza has returned to the country as well. Now, I'm determined to increase our efforts to ensure that we get through this winter as safely as we possibly can.
Now, there is an expectation that COVID cases will increase this winter. This information campaign will be targeting some particular cohorts within the community, including parents, urging parents to get their children aged between 5 and 11 vaccinated. He says that the vaccination rates within that cohort are lagging their older siblings, so children over the age of 12. And Mr Butler's also, this campaign will also be targeting vaccination rates in Indigenous communities. He says booster rates within the Indigenous populations across the country are also lagging the broader Australian community. And just finally, the government is also concerned about the fourth dose rates amongst elderly residents in aged care facilities. Mr Butler says that there are hundreds of aged care facilities that currently have outbreaks. He says dozens of elderly residents are dying each week. So the government, through the Department of Health, will be actively contacting these facilities to arrange in-reach clinics to go and visit these facilities and ensure that elderly residents who are now eligible for fourth doses are able to get one.
Noor Hayder reporting from Canberra. One of Australia's best-known swimming coaches has been charged with historical child sex offences. Isaac Nuruzi reports from Bankstown Court in Sydney.
Renowned swim instructor Dick Kane has been charged for historical abuse against 2 teenage girls in the 1970s. Mr Kane, who is now 76 years old himself, was arrested early this morning. In January last year, New South Wales Police received allegations of sexual and indecent assault at a swim school in Sydney. During their investigation, police say they also received information about more alleged assaults of another teenage girl. Dick Kane has been charged with 9 offences. 6 of those relate to carnal knowledge and 3 are indecent assault offences. He will appear here at Bankstown Local Court later this afternoon, where police will oppose bail.
Queensland Police have charged 4 people with murder over the death of a man in the Lockyer Valley west of Brisbane. A 48-year-old man was fatally stabbed during an altercation at a home on Monday night. The house was also set on fire. 2 19-year-old women and 2 men aged 19 and 24 have been charged with murder, attempted murder and also arson.
Can I just say it was a hard investigation, as much as, we had investigators from the southern region, we had investigators from the homicide squad since Monday evening, worked there all the way through, and fortunately for us, we were able to make a number of arrests yesterday afternoon.
The West Australian Government has apologised to former elite athletes who suffered mistreatment and abuse while training at the WA Institute of Sport's Women's Artistic Gymnastics program. The apology follows a review from Sport Integrity Australia, which found gymnasts, some of them as young as 5 years old, were abused in the program, which spanned 3 decades. Reporter Samia O'Keefe is at WA Parliament.
This apology comes following a review by Sport Integrity Australia, which examined dozens of allegations from former gymnasts that they were abused physically and emotionally while training at WAST between 1988 and 2016, when the program was closed. Now, that review spoke to more than 90 former athletes, coaches and support staff, and when it was handed down in April, it found that the abuse did likely occur. Now, at that time in April, WAST publicly came out and apologised to the gymnasts for the behaviour that they suffered. And now today, the Sports Minister David Templeman has also delivered a public apology. There were 6 women who were in Parliament today, so while it was dozens that made that the allegations, there were 6 of them here today to receive that apology, and they have welcomed it, but they also want to make sure that there's action that's followed up from this apology. Now, in addition to receiving that, delivering that apology, the government also announced today it would set up a child protection unit to ensure this sort of behaviour can't happen again, and the women have welcomed that announcement.
Another former Veterans Affairs Minister has taken a stand in the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide. Darren Chester is a witness in the Townsville hearings. Reporter Jay Toomey is there.
The Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide has entered day 3 of its hearings here in Townsville. This morning, we've heard from the former Veterans Affairs Minister, Darren Chester. He was in the role between 2018 to 2021 for more than 3 years. Yesterday, we heard from his successor, Andrew Gee, who'd been in the role for just under 12 months. This morning's hearings, though, revolved around a report by the Productivity Commission that was investigating a better way to support veterans. It was released 3 years ago this week. At the time, the then Minister Darren Chester described it as the most significant veterans-related report provided to the government during his time as Minister. That report had 3 recommendations about harmonisation of entitlements with the goal to help veterans simplify the claims process. Counsel Assisting Peter Singleton put to Mr Chester that the complexity of navigating the system was contributing to mental health issues and risk of suicide for some veterans. Mr Chester seemed to reject that. He said he couldn't point to a single case where the complexities had led to serious mental health issues or death by suicide. Other discussions today tried to get to the bottom of whether the government had actually provided a response to the Productivity Commission's 3 recommendations. Counsel Assisting Peter Singleton questioned whether it had been 3 years between the recommendations being made and any response or lack thereof by the government.
There's no decision on whether to accept or reject the recommendation, in principle or in detail.
Well, I think that is largely fair in the way you've described it, but there is also, I think, the indication that government wishes to pursue that harmonisation through the legislative reform roadmap is a decision itself, but not to the extent to which it describes a yes or no decision.
This afternoon, we'll also hear from John Caligari, the chair of Oasis Townsville, a veterans hub here in North Queensland.
And if you are a serving or a former member of the Defence Forces or a relative in need of support, you can call the Defence Family Helpline on 1800 624 608, Open Arms on 1800 011 046, and assistance is also available at Lifeline, that number 13 11 14. New South Wales Health has launched an ambitious strategy to tackle hepatitis C. The state's health authorities are aiming to eliminate the disease as a public health concern by 2028. I'm joined now by Carolyn Murray, who's the Director of New South Wales Centre for Public Health. Carolyn, thanks so much. How difficult is it to achieve this target? And tell us a little bit about how this target came about.
Well, in New South Wales, we've got new treatments for hepatitis C, which were introduced in 2016, and these are 95% effective. And that means that we're going to eliminate hepatitis C by 2028 in New South Wales.
How serious is this disease, and who are the most vulnerable category or demographic susceptible to the illness?
Hepatitis C is one of the leading causes of liver cancer in Australia and can cause permanent damage to the liver. And thankfully, if someone has hepatitis C, they can receive a really safe and effective treatment. The virus is spread by blood when it enters a person's bloodstream, and it mostly affects people with a history of injecting drug use or those that are current injecting drug users.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about the illness?
Hep C doesn't just affect people that inject drugs, so it's actually where blood is spread. So if it enters a person's bloodstream, it can be from body piercing, maybe from tattoos. And if anyone has a risk factor, we really encourage you to talk to your general practitioner or your local doctor about that.
And is it difficult to track where this virus is spreading in the country, especially when you're getting people coming in from overseas? The borders are now open. Has that been difficult to measure?
I think one of the challenges for New South Wales is that there's 40,000 people living with hepatitis C that still are undiagnosed. And this strategy is to build on that work that we've been doing and to enable people to come forward and get tested. So if there's any reason you think you need a test for hepatitis C, or you've had a history of injecting drugs in the past, or you've had a tattoo perhaps from another country where hepatitis C virus is quite high, then come forward and get a test. It's a simple blood test, and the treatment actually can cure hepatitis C.
Carolyn Murray, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Casino operator Crown Resorts has been given conditional approval to open its Sydney casino by the New South Wales gaming regulator following its sale to US private equity firm Blackstone Group. The authority says the decision was made because of significant reforms at the company. Lawyer Andrew Fernbank says, who is the founder of legal consultancy firm GovLaw, spoke to business reporter Sue Lannan earlier. He said the decision to approve the licence was not unexpected.
We did see Crown given the green light in Victoria and able to proceed, albeit under the special monitor, for a number of years. And obviously they've put in a lot of work there behind the scenes working with the regulator in their state.
Do you think, though, that Crown Resorts has really cleaned up its act? Is it a new company now that Blackstone, a private equity firm, will take it over?
Look, I think a lot of that will remains to be seen with the new management team that will be put in place by the new owner, and they'll have to satisfy not only the state-based gambling regulators but also the federal regulator AUSTRAC in regard to anti-money laundering, risk management and compliance.
Well, Crown says it spent 15 months working with the regulator. It's pledged to become, quote, one of the most respected operators in the world. I mean, do you think that Crown Resorts can clean up its act?
Well, I think you're going to see that obviously there's the federal court action that is still taking place at the federal level by AUSTRAC against Crown Resorts. So this, as it were, green light at the state level is not the end of the story.
Andrew Fernback, are gambling laws in Australia and the anti-money laundering laws too weak to control the activities of casinos? Because there's also problems with pokie machines at RSL clubs, and the other big operator, Star Casino, also admitted for still allowing money laundering at its casinos.
I think we need to see two things. We need to see better integration, and we're starting to see that between federal and state levels. So AUSTRAC and the Victorian Gaming and Casino Control Commission signed an MOU back at the end of April to work together on an enhanced basis. So we need to see better integration between federal and state agencies on this. But secondly, we need to see more balanced enforcement from AUSTRAC. So we've seen the big enforcement cases are $1.3 billion against Westpac. Before that, $700 million against Commonwealth Bank, $43 million against Tabcorp. But what we really need to see is AUSTRAC balancing out in the application of its regulatory toolkit. We need to see more of the infringement notice, which is a bit like a parking ticket, the sort of smaller end of town, requiring enforceable undertakings, and also requiring independent experts to go in and do risk assessments, check out the program. So there are a whole lot of other aspects that we need to see from AUSTRAC in a more regular enforcement approach, including the lesser options, because waiting several years for federal court action is not enough, obviously, to be managing the risks in this space.
Floods in Bangladesh and India have claimed the lives of nearly 70 people and forced millions to leave their homes. The heavy rains have continued unabated, making it difficult for rescuers to help those trapped by the rising waters.
When the rain relents, rescuers work with the means they have to get people out. In small groups and clusters, hundreds of thousands are still to get to safety. In these rural and remote areas of the Indian state of Assam, it isn't a fast-moving operation. But without it, some would simply not make it. Across the border in Bangladesh, the situation is even worse. This is the gate of a school in Sylhet that was turned into a shelter. If it rains anymore, it will no longer serve as a refuge. Inside, people who've managed to save themselves but lost everything they had. Our home was swept away in the floods. All our belongings have gone too, this woman says. Anger against the administration is growing. Our home was flooded and we've come here for shelter, but we haven't received any relief material yet. We're here without food, she says. Unrelenting rainfall for more than a week caused the flooding. And while this is a common occurrence in these low-lying areas during the monsoon season, Bangladeshi officials say it's the worst they've seen in more than a century. Today, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina surveyed the scale of the disaster that's hit her country. She insists her government is doing all it can. Supplies have reached some areas: food packets, water and medicines. This is Molvi Bazar to the south of Sylhet. But the threat of more rain remains. And in both countries, most people who've been affected had very little even before the floods hit. They'll need all the help they can get to rebuild their lives.
US election officials have given emotional accounts of how Donald Trump and his allies pressured them to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. The committee investigating the January 6 attack on the US Capitol has heard how officials in battleground states were threatened and harassed. North America correspondent Jade McMillan reports.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
The campaign to overturn the 2020 presidential election came right to the doorstep of those who tried to obstruct it.
You're a tyrant, you're a felon, and you must turn yourself in to the authorities.
Just one example of harassment levelled against state election officials and their families.
We have various groups come by and they have had video panel trucks with videos of me proclaiming me to be a pedophile and a pervert and a corrupt and politician.
Threats of
Republicans in battleground states say they were repeatedly asked to challenge Joe Biden's victory.
The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted. And I think the number is in the close to 5,000 people.
They pushed back, arguing there was no evidence. But the committee heard Donald Trump and his lawyer Rudy Giuliani continued to pressure the officials and election workers.
Their places of work, their homes should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports.
Shay Moss says her life was upended when the former president and his allies accused her of committing voter fraud.
I no longer give out my business card. I don't transfer calls. I don't want anyone knowing my name.
This hearing was aimed at demonstrating the personal cost of Donald Trump's false claims of a stolen election. But the committee is also warning that the threat posed by the so-called big lie isn't over.
If you can convince Americans that they cannot trust their own elections, that any time they lose it is somehow illegitimate, then what is left but violence to determine who should govern?
An ominous message ahead of 2024. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Washington.
And the US is rolling out COVID vaccines for children 6 months old and over following the green light from regulators last week. An estimated 19 million US children under the age of 5 are now eligible to receive the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. At a vaccination clinic in Washington, the US president described it as an important milestone.
A monumental step forward. The United States is now the first country in the world to offer safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines for children as young as 6 months old.
Australian regulators are still considering whether to approve the COVID vaccine for the young age group. Pioneering women in Australian politics and society are being honoured in a new exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra. And though the women featured come from many different backgrounds, they all share a common cause.
Rosie Batty never set out to be a change maker, but that's what she became in the wake of her son Luke's murder in 2014.
I didn't expect to be listened to. I just spoke my truth.
The grieving mother helped start a crucial conversation about family violence. And after 8 years of advocacy, she no longer feels the need to be grateful for a seat at the table and the chance to make her case.
This is what we deserve, and it's the least of what we should expect.
She's just one of several trailblazing women featured in the Changemakers exhibition, which is opened at the Museum of Australian Democracy. They include feminist author Anne Summers, 2021 Australian of the Year Grace Tame, and the first female Governor-General, Dame Quentin Bryce.
There is a source of
inspiration and support to be found in the courage of these young change makers.
It's a fitting tribute inside Old Parliament House, a building which for decades was the domain of powerful men.
It's incredibly important and very, very timely at this point in Australia's democratic progress.
Several artists have also worked together to recreate iconic banners of the feminist movement. They chart the battles women have fought, from equal pay to reproductive autonomy, struggles which are still ongoing.
These rights were hard won, and that we can very easily go back and have those be taken away.
A reminder that while much has changed, there's more to come. Patrick Bell, ABC News, Canberra.
And taking a look at the weather in the capital cities for tomorrow, mostly sunny in Brisbane and Sydney, frost and then sunny conditions for Canberra, a cloudy day for Melbourne, some late showers for Hobart, warm in Adelaide, rainy for Perth, and a top of 32 degrees in Darwin. Here are the top stories on ABC News. More than 280 people have been killed by a magnitude 6.1 earthquake in Afghanistan. The quake struck in the country's east near the city of Khost. Tremors were felt more than 500 kilometres away in Pakistan and India. Authorities say the death toll is likely to rise, with rescue efforts still underway. The energy market operator will gradually remove its intervention in Australia's East Coast energy market over the coming days. AEMO suspended the market a week ago amid fears supply shortages would lead to blackouts. The government says the power grid needs to continue a transition to renewable energy to fend off the potential for further disruptions. Former swimming coach Dick Kane has been charged over the alleged sexual abuse of two teenage girls in the 1970s. Police arrested the 76-year-old at a home in Condell Park this morning following an investigation into the historical sexual abuse of two teenage girls at a swim school at Cars Park. He's been charged with 9 offences, including indecent assault. And Crown Resorts has been given conditional permission to open its casino at Barangaroo in Sydney. The Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority previously refused to grant the gaming giant a licence after a year-long investigation uncovered links to money laundering. The authority now says Crown has overhauled its gaming model and is now suitable to operate a casino under initial supervision. Well, as we've just heard, the East Coast energy market will begin resuming normal operations from 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Operator CEO Daniel Westerman and Energy Minister Chris Bowen says the grid is still vulnerable and must be protected from future shocks.
This situation is caused by a multitude of factors, and yes, ageing plant, which does break down and has more maintenance issues, is an issue. Of course, the war in Ukraine and the impact of global commodity prices is an issue. I think it points you to the long-term answer to this, which is a transition to firmed renewables and transmission. That is the long-term answer to de-link us from international price shocks, as well as ageing infrastructure. We'll absolutely be working very closely with the regulator and the Energy Markets Commission on a series of actions that do take steps to prevent this from happening again. It's not a place where the market operator wants to be in suspending the market, and so we're looking at we'll obviously undertake a detailed investigation together with the regulator and others, understand comprehensively the lessons learned and put in place actions so that it doesn't happen again.
I want to see this done. I want to see it done right. Now, as I've also made clear, there will be a degree of flexibility, of course, as to how states implement the capacity mechanism with particular regard to their own state circumstance. But this is a massive transformation which we need to get cracking on. We need to make faster progress on this transformation of the energy grid, and we need the capacity mechanism to help us do that, to provide that safety net underneath as we engage in this very significant transformation to a much more renewable economy, a much more renewable energy system with much more storage. Now, I've made clear, and ministers have made clear, we want the capacity mechanism to primarily focus on new technology, storage being prime amongst it. That is what we will deliver. There'll be further discussions between me and state ministers, but I'm very confident we will deliver a good national framework, because we have to be getting on with the job, because this transformation, which is so important to the new government's agenda, is actually also so important to the country.
Australia's first community-owned energy retailer, Enova, has been placed into voluntary administration. Emma Rennie reports.
8 years ago, coal seam gas was a really hot-button topic here in the Northern Rivers, and it was partially out of the anti-CSG movement that the idea for Enova Energy was born, to supply renewable energy to regional customers. They raised nearly $4 million from more than 1,000 investors. Over the years since, they've grown to serve around 13,000 customers across New South Wales and southeast Queensland. This week, the company announced it has entered voluntary administration. The CEO says the current state of the energy market is diabolical and is forcing out small and medium energy retailers such as itself. It says it's been unable to secure a new fixed pricing agreement to receive renewable energy to on-sell to its customers, and that's left it at the mercy of a very volatile wholesale energy market, which has seen prices of fossil fuels and energy skyrocket in recent weeks. We have not been able to speak to the CEO and the current chair of Enova Energy since the voluntary administration was announced, but we did speak to the former chair and a founding member of Enova, Alison Crook. She says that the fact that it's been forced into a voluntary administration is a sign that the energy market is broken.
As the then CEO of AEMO once said to me, that Generation should never have been allowed to own retail. They own both ends of the market, so that when there's volatility in the market caused by wars, cold snaps, they can make super profits on Generation.
Right now, Enova Energy customers will not have their energy turned off. They will be rolled over to a new energy retailer. That will be done automatically by the Australian Energy Regulator. Alison Crook says it is a shame that Enova won't see its big picture ideas come to fruition. She said the company had hoped to implement large-scale shared community batteries so that regional communities could be more reliant and self-sufficient with renewable energy and did not have to rely on the grid for power. She says while the big players, the generator retailers, continue to have a stranglehold on the industry, small retailers such as Enova that offer options and competitive pricing will continue to be pushed out.
An inquest has begun into the death of two men during flooding in northern Tasmania in 2016. The partner of one of those men told the hearing she thought she was going to die as their van became trapped. Lucy McDonald reports from Hobart.
So the inquest is looking at the deaths of two men who died in Tasmanian floodwaters in 2016 in separate incidences. It's going to primarily focus on the emergency response to the floods. Now, tomorrow is all about Trevor Foster. He was feeding his sheep in his paddock in Ouse when he was swept away by floodwaters. But today was about Peter Watson. Now, he was on his usual newspaper route with his partner Karen Cassidy when their van got caught in floodwaters. As the water sort of began to rise, they realised how serious it was and talked about calling family because they were worried it might be the last chance they ever got to speak to them. Now, they managed to clamber onto the roof of the van and they did call family there. But when the van shifted at one point, unfortunately, Peter Watson slipped off into the water and that was the last time Miss Cassidy ever saw him. She, however, was able to stay out there for a while longer. She took off her shirt and lit it on fire, sort of waving it around to try and capture attention. She did end up in the water and clambered onto some debris where she stayed for about 2 hours before she was found by emergency responders. So she was very emotional as she spoke to the inquest today, saying it's something she thinks she will never get over. We also heard from some police officers, including one who sort of came across the floodwaters and was questioning whether or not he should have crossed them. But the coroner consoled him, saying there was nothing else he could have done. And if he had tried to cross those floodwaters, it was likely we would have been looking at a fourth death. Now, one of the interesting things to come out today was the fact that police didn't have swift water training, meaning they weren't equipped for this kind of flooding rescue situation. The inquest will continue tomorrow.
The New South Wales Premier says no suitable candidates were found in an initial recruitment push for John Barilaro's new trade job in New York, despite documents showing 2 candidates were ranked very highly. Documents obtained by Labor show that there have been a previous round of recruitment, but the job was re-advertised and the former Deputy Premier announced as the successful candidate last week. A spreadsheet shows 2 candidates in that initial round exceeded requirements in 3 criteria and met the 4th. But Premier Dominic Perrottet says the selection of Mr Barilaro was natural given his experience.
I don't believe it is uncommon for ambassador roles, trade commissioner roles to be filled by previous politicians, and particularly ones who have served with distinction in senior roles. That's something that's happened throughout the history of time. What's important is that when these processes occur, they occur in a way that's transparent, independent, and the best candidate is filled. Now, I have received no information that there was any challenge, there were any issues here in relation to the recruitment process.
The New South Wales government is outselling its $27 billion worth of budget initiatives, including reforms to stamp duty. But the Labor opposition is questioning how the government is going to pay for it. Here's state political reporter Ashley Raper.
Now, this was a signature policy that was revealed yesterday in the budget. Of course, in the lead up to yesterday, there had been a number of commitments and announcements made, close to $30 billion in money, in new money that was committed. But what was revealed yesterday was rather a modest change. Now, the government has been selling this budget so far as a big reform budget, but around the stamp duty reform, it was quite a small step and nowhere near what the Premier Dominic Perrottet had been talking about for years, for what he wanted to do in transforming the system. So what was announced yesterday in the policy that for first home buyers who are going to buy a house up to the value of $1.5 million, they'll be offered a choice whether to pay the stamp duty up front or pay an annual land tax, which will be $400 a year plus 0.3% of the land value. Now, Labor opposes this policy. They say that they don't believe that it is the right path for this state to go, and they are saying that it is a tax on people's homes. Now, the Premier Dominic Perrottet has been out today, traditionally as they do with the Treasurer, selling the budget, and he has defended the policy.
There would be very few people around the country right now who are earning above 3% pay increases. It's the taxes of the public that pay for the wages in government. And I think that where we've landed is fair and reasonable. It's nation leading. I think parents across the state appreciate that too.
Now, Labor is likely to continue to put pressure on the government over its stamp duty, but also on its spending. And Labor also has an opportunity to reply, and the opposition leader Chris Minns will deliver his budget reply speech tomorrow, Kirsten.
Ashley Raper reporting from Sydney. The Queensland state budget has been met with a mixed response. Reporter Michael Rennie has more now from Brisbane.
The mining sector has criticised the state government in Queensland's budgets and a new tiered system it will bring in for taxing the mining sector, saying that it is just a tax grab, and it will mean that the royalties in Queensland, they are some of the highest, if not the highest royalties anywhere around the world. It's also saying that the mining sector will need to reassess its investment in Queensland, but the Queensland state government, it's making no apologies on introducing this new tiered tax system, saying that these record profits that the mining sector is getting at the moment from the price of coal right now, some of that should be, or more of that should be going into Queensland's economy. This new tiered system will be introduced and it will basically look at the price of coal, and if it's very, very high, then the tiered system will follow accordingly. There's also been some criticism around the health investment in Queensland, particularly from the Australian Medical Association of Queensland. It says that these record amounts that the government is spruiking is a little bit too late in the game. It's really something that should have come in some time ago, and in fact the initial investment will only really deal with the current inflation that we are experiencing at the moment. You look at the figures, it is a lot of money, $23.6 billion for the next financial year. $9.8 billion, almost $9.8 billion has been earmarked to build 3 new hospitals over the next 6 years. It will also be used to upgrade 11 hospitals and create 2,200 new beds in Queensland. Other sectors have said that there's other parts of the economy missing out in this budget, particularly in social housing and the cost of living. It hasn't been addressed in this budget, and also the rental crisis currently being experienced throughout the state.
People wanting to travel overseas are being told to plan up to 6 weeks ahead as long queues and wait times continue at passport offices across the country. Husnia Shams reports from Sydney.
Delays in passport applications have forced long queues here at the Sydney Passport Office. Dozens of people have formed long lines right around the building. Some people have even camped out overnight.
So my husband has been camping out since 1:30 and I just came and met him an hour ago. So bless him, he has been here overnight, waiting for 6 weeks. I fly out on Monday.
I got here at 3:30, so a long time. 9 weeks.
The number of passport applications has increased from pre-pandemic levels of up to 9,000 a day to up to 12,000 a day. DFAT says processing times have doubled since October. It's now advising people to allow at least 6 weeks to get their passport. The federal government has blamed the previous government for the backlog, saying it was due to poor planning ahead of borders reopening. The government says more than 300 extra staff will be recruited at call centres to speed up the process. Now, the delays are threatening to undo holiday plans for many. More than 2 million passengers are expected to fly in and out of Sydney Airport during the July school holidays. The forecast includes 1.5 million domestic customers and 560,000 international passengers. That's an increase of around 300,000 people compared to the April period when the airport struggled with massive delays. Sydney Airport says it's expecting long waits. It's advising people on domestic flights to arrive about 2 hours before departure and those on international flights to arrive about 3 hours before, unless advised otherwise by their airline.
Ukrainian authorities say at least 15 civilians have been killed in a series of Russian shelling attacks in the northeast city of Kharkiv. The city had enjoyed a period of relative peace after Russian forces were pushed back from the area several weeks ago. However, Russia has since reoccupied positions near the city and resumed shelling of the region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks in his nightly address.
Cruel and cynical Russian artillery shelling will not give anything to the occupiers, but the Russian army is deaf to any rationality. It just keeps destroying, keeps killing. It seeks to show by this to its command that it is not standing still.
Jurors in the US have found comedian Bill Cosby sexually abused a 16-year-old girl at the Playboy Mansion in 1975. The Los Angeles jury delivered the verdict in favour of Judy Huff, who is now 64, and awarded her more than $700,000 in damages. The 84-year-old Cosby did not attend the civil trial. He denied any sexual contact with the victim in 2015 video deposition shown to jurors. Ms Huff, speaking after the announcement, detailed the toll of her 7-year legal fight.
It's been torture. It has. Just to be ripped apart, thrown under the bus, backed over. And this, to me, is such a big victory. It really is. To all victims.
Britain's biggest train strike in 3 decades has caused chaos and disruption for millions of commuters across England, Scotland and Wales. Just 1 in 5 trains have been left running after rail workers walked off the job over pay and conditions. Buses still operated, but for many in London, it was back to bicycles. The London Underground was almost mostly closed due to a separate strike.
It includes a pay policy that's making people all across Britain poorer. Some of our members have not had a pay rise for the 3rd anniversary now.
The strike is due to continue on Thursday and Saturday if the unions and government don't reach an agreement. Well, Prince William is celebrating his 40th birthday, with the milestone coming at a time of increasing responsibility for the second in line to the throne. A public advocate for issues like mental health and homelessness, the Prince has become a symbol for an evolving monarchy.
Where do you go for your 40th? It seems a supermarket in West London. There was a surprise shopper there this afternoon. The Duke of Cambridge popped in to give some birthday cake to big issue seller Dave Martin. The pair met a couple of weeks ago when Prince William went out with Dave to sell the magazine. As he enters a new decade, tackling homelessness is a priority for William.
He's invested in the problem, and he's invested in trying to find a solution for those who are affected by the problem. And long may it continue is what I say.
On a personal level, marriage to Kate and fatherhood have suited him. Their children were some of the stars of the show over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. And his focus on his family will see a big move this summer when the Cambridges leave London to set up home in Windsor.
The move here has been driven by personal reasons. Behind the castle walls, there is greater freedom for the family than they currently have in London. The children will go to school nearby. But it also puts William closer to his grandmother at a time when he is stepping up his official duties.
One unresolved issue is the fallout with his brother, Prince Harry.
I do know from sources very close to William that he is still very hurt about some of the things that his brother and his sister-in-law have said and done. There's not the closeness there once was, and I think there's probably quite a few bridges to be rebuilt before they get to that stage.
The years ahead will be filled with significant change. But for now, at 40, the once cautious, contained Prince has become a more open, confident future king.
NASA has conducted a dress rehearsal of its moon rocket launch at Cape Canaveral in Florida. It's the space organisation's last major milestone before the rocket is scheduled to take off later this year. The rocket, dubbed the Space Launch System, will initially fly around the moon and back as a test flight before astronauts climb aboard in 2024. The third mission, which is expected no earlier than 2025, would have astronauts actually land back on the moon. For children in remote areas, the opportunities to play and socialise can be few and far between. Now, a travelling service spanning dozens of remote Indigenous communities and pastoral stations is seeking to change that, one playgroup at a time.
Tipping the scales against isolation. Ella and McKenna are fast making friends. It's a rarity for Ella Blackwood, who lives on a remote cattle station with her two siblings and attends school remotely. But more than 400 kilometres from her home at Lake Nash, near the Territory-Queensland border, this playgroup in the Barkly Tablelands is giving her the chance to buddy up.
And then we finally got to come, so I get to meet some other kids and play with them.
Whether it's dress-ups or drawings, the youngsters are quick to forge bonds.
And I found Ella and her friends.
The playgroup is run by the Katherine Isolated Children's Service and travels across much of the territory with mobile playgroups.
We cover approximately 40 Aboriginal communities and stations between the two teams, and we try and visit twice a year.
For the Gibsons who live at Lake Nash, it's a joy to see.
For them to, come out of their shells, introduce themselves to other people, like all those sort of social skills that probably they don't really get to use at home.
The region's annual race weekend is what brought the event to the Barkly Tablelands, and there's plenty on offer for children from far and wide, including the Hunt for Lollyman, a sweet end to a fun weekend. Miles Holbrook Walk, ABC News, Brunette Downs.
Time for sport now. Here's Daniel Garb.
Thank you. If Queensland are to seal the State of Origin series in Perth on Sunday, it's likely their star 5'8" Cameron Munster will have a big say in proceedings. He engineered the Maroons' surprise Game 1 win in Sydney, and it's led to some suggestions that he's the next Wally Lewis. Munster was asked about that today.
Oh, look, it's a nice accolade to have, but he's done a lot more stuff than I would have done in my career. And and he's obviously the King of Queensland, and he's always going to be the King of Queensland. You have greats like Jonathan Thurston and Darren Lockyer in the 6 jersey as well, and there's only one Wally Lewis, and I can just go out there and do my job for Queensland.
So Queensland get into Perth tomorrow. New South Wales have been based in the West all week. They need to win to keep the series alive. Here's their coach, Brad Fittler.
We just compete a bit harder. We lost a lot of the effort areas, and that's really disappointing. So we just compete harder, and I think we all feel confident that if we do that, then we can win.
Breaking news from the World Swimming Championships in Budapest, and this is really disappointing news for Shayna Jack, who of course missed the last Olympics with that doping ban. She worked so hard to get back into the Australian team, made it to the World Championships. She has emerged from the pool after a 100-metre heat, fallen over and broken her hand that is now out for the rest of the meet. That news just through. Devastating for Shayna Jack. In the meantime, though, Australia's medal run in the pool has continued, with teen sensation Molly O'Callaghan winning silver in the women's 200-metre freestyle. She finished behind Yang of China. It's her first individual meet, and to claim a silver medal, Molly O'Callaghan, the teen sensation, that is quite something. It continues the incredible run by the Australian women in the pool. That means they have managed to snare a medal, the Australian women, in every single event at these World Championships. Australia is 4th in the medal tally at the halfway point. Meantime, Australia's greatest ever female basketballer is making a stunning comeback. Lauren Jackson is coming out of retirement 9 years after she pulled the pin on her career to try out for the Opals World Cup squad. Now 41 years of age, Jackson has been playing for Albury Wodonga this season. She's a 4-time Olympic medalist, a 5-time WNBA champion, and perhaps an Opal again. Now, she said today that the Opals camp begins on Monday and there'll be a cut after that, so she could be straight out. She said, "I'm not getting my hopes up as there are so many girls chasing my spot. I won't be shattered if I miss, as I'm still unsure whether I can compete at the top level." She's also applied for an exemption for medicinal cannabis, which has helped with her injuries. And Sri Lanka has beaten Australia in a one-day international series for the first time since 1992 after clinching Game 4 in Colombo. They were led by Charith Asalanka, who made 110. Sri Lanka put on 258. Australia fell 4 runs short in their chase, making 254. They lost wickets with regularity, unfortunately, the Australians, which included David Warner, stumped for 99. Here it is there, devastating for him. So Sri Lanka winning the series 3-1. Now we look ahead to the test matches, of course, but a nation that was in the doldrums not too long ago in a cricketing sense, Sri Lanka, they will be buoyed, to say the least, by their first ODI series victory over Australia since 1992. Lara?
Thanks, Daniel. Checking tomorrow's weather in the capital cities, mostly sunny in Brisbane and Sydney. Frost, then sunny conditions for Canberra. A cloudy day forecast for Melbourne. Late showers over Hobart. Warm in Adelaide. Rainy for Perth, and a top of 32 degrees in Darwin. And remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Laura Hines. We'll have more on our top stories coming up next here on ABC News, as well as more information on that quake in Afghanistan. Stay with us.
It's the show that has advertisers shaking in their boots. Yuck! Where adverts can go from hero to zero.
That's not very sexy in terms of messaging.
And it's just not clever marketing. This, to me, is genius, Will.
And every campaign gets a roasting.
Coffee fit for an Aussie. In the words of my people, yeah, nah.
New Gruen, tonight at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, the one and only Kate Miller-Heidke is with us in studio as she sets off on tour.
And we're all shook up. Zach's here with his verdict on Baz Luhrmann's epic biopic, Elvis. Don't miss it.
Some people search for it, others hide from it, from household names to people who have found themselves in the spotlight. Join me, Courtney Act, on 1+1 as I speak to well-known Australians about what fame means to them.
1+1 with Courtney Act, tomorrow 9:35 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
We're about to go fishing in the deep waters of the ABC archive.
Hope you catch something.
Come on a trip down memory lane.
You right to go? Looking forward to it.
With 6